This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Donald Trump needs a weak dollar.
I didn't hear too many bullish cases for China in 2025.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Trump took steps on everything from TikTok to the southern border.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. VIX out 2 points. Let's get right to it, Paul. I mean, I'm sorry. The market walking away this morning and walking away south.
Yeah, I mean, we got the S&P off 1%, the NASDAQ off 1.2% here. It's that whole uncertainty trade, Tom. I think, we heard this 1,000,001 times. The market does not like uncertainty, and there's a lot of uncertainty out there in the marketplace as it relates to economic policy. And you kind of see that in the financial markets here.
You see it immediately in the financial markets, a carryover from what we saw Friday. We are certain we'll give you conversations that matter. Henrietta Treyz, we've asked specially to come in. I believe it's in this hour. Yes, in the 7:30-ish hour as well. We've got some good asset allocation types. Michael McKee on the economics of the moment. We will go, I think, to Ottawa.
Oh,
have you been to Ottawa?
I've never been. No, I'd love
Lisa,
to go.
have you been to Ottawa?
No.
I've never been.
Okay.
It's like farther up north.
Yeah, that's serious Canada right there.
Serious Canada. It's like full Canada.
Yep.
We're going to go to Ottawa over the Liberal Party elections of Mr. Carney. Right now, futures at -63. That's S&P futures -63. Dow futures at -400. NASDAQ -1.2%. Lisa will do that better than I can do it. Dana Telsey on retail in America will be with us as well. Good morning on your commute across the nation. Good morning across the Commonwealth of Canada as well. We say on YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts, and say good evening across all of the Pacific Rim over to India as well. From the Interactive Broker Studios, the Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Well, after that rebound on Friday, futures really taking a hit this morning. We have NASDAQ futures down more than 1%, S&P futures down 1%, and Dow futures down 0.9%. The yields are falling too, and that's as, investors look to that safety of fixed income assets. So you have the 2-year yield, 3.94%, down 5 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.24%, that's down about 5 basis points. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little change. Now, Tesla, Nvidia, they are leading the losses among the Mag 7 stocks this morning. Tesla down 3%, really feeling the pressure from BYD's rapid rise. Tesla shipments in China, well, they've been falling for 5 consecutive months with a 49% drop in February compared to last year. Nvidia down more than 2%. And since we mentioned Nvidia, Broadcom, they're falling too, down 2%. It's on pace to hand back some of Friday's gains after those strong earnings. After the close, we move on to Oracle. Investors are going to wait for any AI news from them. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. To get us started here, very important, Amy Wu Silverman joining us right now. We're thrilled that she could be with us today for an extended discussion, of course, with RBC Capital Markets. Can you extrapolate elegantly, Amy, this downtrend? I mean, I got a well-behaved logarithmic chart, blah, blah, blah. But can you go through the exercise of extrapolating out VIX or extrapolating out NASDAQ 100?
Good morning, guys. So honestly, this is the question that we have been struggling with right now, which is, look, year on year, obviously all your volatility stats are higher, not too surprising given the market move. But right now, we're sort of still in this garden variety drawdown. And the big questions I will tell you institutional investors have is, are we going to get to that second tier of fear, which is what Lori Calvasina likes to call it, meaning are we going to get into more scary territory, 3 standard deviation drawdown territory? And right now, you're not seeing it. It's still kind of this garden variety, very orderly, Tom. Sell-off where you do see this pickup in vol and correlation, but you take this back 5-10 years, we're still really in 40th to 50th percentiles of these stats. They're not showing Panic at the Disco yet.
Poetry. And what's so important here, folks, is the media looks at percent change and treats every index, every series the same. and pros like Amy Wu Silverman look in standard deviations, and we're just not to the side. What do you think, Paul? VIX of 30, is that like
that gets
the Sweeney tip point?
Well, north of 20 kind of gets my attention, and here we are. So we'll see where we go. So, Amy, what are you hearing from your clients out there when you talk to them over the last, I don't know, couple, 3 weeks here? What are you hearing from your clients?
There's been a huge inflection point. You know, most of this crew were the same folks who, after the elections, were saying that Donald Trump was going to manage the stock market. The stock market is gauged for success. And unfortunately, you know, those are not the talking points right now. It's really simple. It's when someone tells you, you know, who they are, you kind of have to believe them. They've been going out and saying there's going to be a period of pain, and the investors are adapting to that. You're certainly seeing it in the stats right now. The question is, how long is this pain going to be, and how deep? So, you know, I don't drive, but I really like driving analogies, and I've just been calling this the volatility pothole when I live in New York, so not much driving.
I gave up my driver's license, folks, over 20. Do you know,
Really?
they wanted my paper Social Security card from when I was 16 years old. That was back, Amy, when FDR was in office, Paul.
So, Amy,
Gotcha.
what are you suggesting clients do here? I mean, we're looking at you know, a lot of uncertainty out there in the marketplace. Are you suggesting people just kind of just move into the highest quality equities and debt that they can find?
Yeah, so it's actually quite simple what I'm saying at this point, which is, if you just, you know, go back to your corporate finance 101, your math 101, correlation is simply a component of volatility. When correlation rises, by definition, volatility has to rise. And we're actually entering a period where I do think there's going to be pretty substantial pickups in correlation. So, you know, it's difficult with hedges, right? Because you have to get the timing right. But we are at a point where it potentially could work much better than it has these past few years, where, you know, you have been carrying, but the hedges haven't played out. We're actually, I think, getting to the point where you're going to get these correlation pickups. So your VIX calls, your S&P puts and put spreads have a better chance of actually paying off now than they did in the past.
Buy the dip. Is that still something that's
go.
out there, Amy?
You know, what's interesting is I obviously talk to institutions day to day, but we watch the retail flows very carefully. Here's what I'll say. You know, you've got this cohort that has just been trained to buy the dip. And while we're not necessarily seeing that, we're not seeing the opposite either. So meaning, you know, that exuberance, that right tail that I've talked about with you guys so many times, that is gone. That has been sucked out of the market. But you're not seeing the opposite either. You're not seeing this flight to hedges. And to some degree, you know, you're still seeing those flows come in. So I do think there's a cohort of the market that will continue to view these as buying opportunities. And again, you know, the hedge fund asset manager side, it's not like they're running for the doors either. It's been very orderly hedges that so far this year have actually been working.
And the differential here between trend and stochastics, the idea of catching a knife in the dark, have we finally broken various trends like Mag 7 trend, some yield trend? Are we where we've shattered trends, Amy Wu, and we're out there blind trying to catch a knife in the dark?
You know, so far, no, Tom. And I'll give you one of my favorite stats from this year, which is we like to run a quarterly Sharpe ratio study. So we just like to level set and say, let's take the S&P 500, let's compute all their individual Sharpe ratios. You know, are these guys falling? Are they rising? What's happening? Because obviously you've got this cash yield component that's changing, but you also got this volatility component that's changing as well. When I just ran this about a week ago, Tom, you still saw absolute positive Sharpe ratios, but they are declining except the Mag 7, that's actually rising. So, you know, when we talk about silver linings and where a potential flight to safety could be, it's still possible it could be in Mag 7. And if that holds, the market holds, right? It's just a concentration issue at the end of the day. So we still could be okay.
Amy, we got to leave it there with breaking news. Amy Wu Silverman, thank you so much with RBC Capital Markets here this morning with the VIX near 26, 25.75. We're down 63 points on Standard & Poor's futures. The drawdown of NASDAQ off of the December high is in the vicinity now of, I believe, 11%. Oh, Canada. Derek DeCloet joins us now, executive editor, managing editor, Bloomberg News in Toronto here on the path forward. Okay, Derek, the Democrats, the Liberals won. It's Mark Carney, ex-governor, financial, monetary guy, England, Canada. The Conservatives are there. If there's an election, who's ahead in the polls?
Well, currently the Conservatives still have a lead, but it has narrowed a lot. When Trudeau was kind of on his way out, very unpopular prime minister at the end of last year, the Conservatives led in most polls by more than 20 points. And now if you look at the polling that takes into account, this is prior to yesterday's vote that made Carney the Liberal leader, but where pollsters were asking, theoretically, who would you vote for if Carney was in the race? Conservatives have kind of a narrow lead. About 33% of decided voters, and the Liberals would, under Carney, have about 28% of voters. So it's going to be tight, and there's going to be probably an election campaign coming soon.
I can just see us up in Ottawa or Toronto, and now we go to the key state, the swing state, whatever. What's the Ohio of Canada? Like Carney excuse me, I don't know how to pronounce it because I'm an ugly American. Who's the conservative candidate again, Derek?
Pierre Poilievre.
Poilievre and Carney, where's their Ohio? Where's the swing state among the provinces?
I mean, this gets decided really in the suburbs of Toronto, the suburbs of Montreal, and the suburbs of Vancouver. The Conservatives have more or less a lock on most of rural Canada and much of the West. The Liberals, historically, and certainly under Justin Trudeau, were extremely strong in the core centers like downtown Toronto and certainly large parts of Quebec. So this is the way to think about this is more like it's the suburbs of Philadelphia. That's the Ohio of Canada.
Bucks County. Don Mills is the Bucks County.
That's right. That's right.
Derek, what's the feeling amongst the average Canadian about what's happening here in the U.S. and how we're kind of interacting with you guys in terms of tariffs and rhetoric and out of this administration?
The first word that comes to mind is anger, and I mean that. It's outright anger. There was a poll last week that was published asking Canadians how they view the United States, whether it's an ally country, an enemy country, or a neutral. For the first time, I think, ever, ally and enemy are equal. 30% of Canadians believe the U.S. is an ally, 30% say enemy, and most of the rest say neutral. And that is, I think a year ago, those numbers would not have looked anything like that. That is entirely because of the trade war and the 51st state taunts and Justin Trudeau. I mean, every poll that you see shows just a huge level of opposition to anything like a 51st state idea. It's in the 80 to 90% range. It's similar across the country. There is no political appetite up here for discussion about any type of union with the U.S.
Good morning on your commute across Canada in America. Derek DeCloet with us right now from Bloomberg News in Toronto. Paul?
Derek, what do we expect to hear from Mr. Carney here in the coming days and weeks and months of his going forward?
It's going to be a really fast transition from Trudeau to Carney. The two men will meet today. We expect Carney will be sworn in probably by the end of the week, and that he's really going to try to drag the Liberals from the left much more to the center to be a more business-friendly face, more focused on growth. And that he sees as sort of his pathway because he won the race because he's seen as the economic guy, and we're, if not in an economic crisis, then on the precipice of one.
What is the nature of the election? I mean, you've got tenure at the Globe and Mail, which I read pretty much every day. Good morning to David Shribman, writing for the Globe and Mail and the Boston Globe as well. Derek, how does the election differ from in America? Like, does Celine Dion show up the Wednesday before the election? I mean, how does it work?
It's an extremely quick election.
Yes.
When we get into a general election, it'll be about six weeks long. Uses the British parliamentary system, and And you can have, as Justin Trudeau had for most of his time, a sort of semi-coalition government where you have to pull together multiple parties if one party does not get 50% of the seats in the House. So it'll be quick, and I think this one will be quite personal and nasty because there is a lot of animus built up between Pierre Poilievre and the Liberal side.
Michael Barr wants to know, do they campaign by like saying, if I'm elected, I'll save the Toronto Maple Leafs? I mean, how does Derek, can Carney or the other guy say, I'm going to fix the Toronto Maple Leafs? Or is that the unfixable?
Mark Carney is a huge Edmonton Oilers fan, so I don't think he has any interest in saving the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Are there any Liberals in Edmonton?
Actually, Edmonton's the most liberal part of Alberta by far. They do have one seat out there.
Do they trot out, does Bobby Orr get trotted out? I mean, I saw the Gretzky uproar with Canada and the series and that, but what should we look for in the election? Kissing babies at hockey games, or is there a different approach?
Well, there will be some of that, but Canadian politics is a more understated affair, compared with U.S. politics. I mean, what you will see is the candidates just over and over, just like they were over and over again in the seven swing states. They will be over and over again in Mississauga, Ontario, and the suburbs north of Montreal, and in Richmond, British Columbia. Because most of the 340 or so House seats are kind of already decided. It's going to come down to probably 60 or 70 swing seats. But Canadian politics is also volatile. Stuff can move really quickly.
I got 20 seconds, Derek. Sparta wants to know if he does a road trip sending Lisa, Michael Barr, Paul Sweeney, and me to Canada, should we go to Toronto or Ottawa to do our show up there?
You should 100% come to Toronto, and we'd love to have you.
There you
See
go.
that?
See?
It's like done.
Canadians we love Canada.
It's amazing. And then we didn't even ask him what Looney's going to do. Derek, thank you so much. Derek DeCloet with just huge journalism
I don't know one
in
person in my life that has anything ever negative to say about Canada.
No.
We love Canada.
Michael
Where did
Barr and
this
I
come
were
from?
talking. I'm not on speaking terms with Lisa, but I am with
Canada
Barr.
view us, a big portion of Canada viewing us as enemy. It's just so disappointing.
It's just tragic. I mean, Michael Barr,
we love Canada.
You should have seen a sturgeon. Michael Barr was 7 years old. He's off a dock surrounded by black flies in Canada.
Yep.
And you caught a sturgeon that was how big? It was like 14 pounds. It's like big as,
My father did catch a catfish. That was.
They have catfish up there?
Yeah.
Very good. I don't know, the whole thing.
Molson Golden, Labatt's,
we're not
all
supposed to.
good.
Did you notice that?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Labatt's, we'll have to see. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom Paul. Lisa, talks between the United States and Ukraine are set to begin tomorrow in Saudi Arabia on a framework to stop Russia's war against Ukraine. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Michael Waltz will take part. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be in Saudi Arabia, but is not expected to immediately take part in the discussions. Global affairs expert Michael Bazakiu says the talks are not beginning from a position of strength because President Trump has paused American military aid and intelligence sharing.
It's a scary time because there are no longer any solid red lines enforced by the United States to keep Mr. Putin in his place. My big fear is that he may exploit this to the point of trying to grab more territory all the way up to Odessa or perhaps even the Moldova border.
Moldova, a democracy, borders Ukraine. Israel applied more humanitarian pressure on Hamas to release more hostages. It comes as Israel cut off its electricity supply to Gaza, affecting a desalination plant producing drinking water. President Trump, returning to the White House Sunday evening, talked to reporters on Air Force One about the benefits of tariffs, even if they could cause inflation down the road.
I think the tariffs are going to be the greatest thing we've ever done as a country. It's going to make our country rich again.
President Trump earlier said on Fox the U.S. economy faces a period of transition. Mark Carney, as we've been talking about, has won the race to become Canada's next prime minister, taking over from Justin Trudeau. Carney, a former central banker, has pledged to protect Canada's economy and sovereignty, promising to keep retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods until the U.S. shows respect.
In trade, as in hockey, Canada will win.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Got to get right to it right now. It's the best time of the year for Paul Sweeney. Tuesday, Wednesday, ACC. Can we talk about the Big East?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's like our Ute.
Sure, it is, Tom. You're exactly right.
It's a throwback here. Patino came in how many years ago at St. John's?
Well, was it 2 or 3 years ago?
Just that
Maybe
short.
Ari might know. Yeah, I mean,
he
turned it around.
Turned it around
amazing,
like boom.
amazing.
How does he do that? Recruiting? It's just that simple?
Yeah, he got a lot of, he doesn't, like he says, I don't recruit high school kids. I recruit college kids out of the portal. And he just went and got some talent, and he got these guys to buy into the fact that I'm Rick Pitino. If you do what I say, you're going to be successful. Boy, what a turnaround.
Really cool.
Unbelievable
And the
story.
big game they were hoping for is St. John's, Connecticut.
Yeah, and I tell you, St. John's, when they play in the Garden for regular season games, sells out the Garden. People are going nuts. It's a tough ticket to get. It's unbelievable.
Second season for Rick Pitino. We need to do data checks today with futures at -60, Dow futures -385. The VIX is concerning. It is out at big two figures, 25.70. We did have a 26 level at some point. Gold 29.05, down $9.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, a mix of tariffs, higher unemployment rate, the federal workforce job cuts, they're all sparking worries of an economic slowdown. And this comes as President Donald Trump told Fox News the economy faces a, quote, period of transition. That has futures really under pressure. NASDAQ futures down more than 1%. S&P futures down 0.9%. Dow futures down about 0.8%. We have the two-year yield, 3.95%, down 4 basis points. And the yield on the 10-year, 4.25%, and that's down about 4 basis points. To commodities right now, COMEX gold, $2,908 an ounce. That's lower. Brent crude up about 0.4%, $70 a barrel. WTI crude, $67 a barrel. Bitcoin extending its losses for a 5th session in a row. Right now, it's down nearly about just over 0.5% at just over 82,000. But cryptocurrency exposed stocks like MicroStrategy off 5%, Coinbase down 5%. Coinbase also taking a hit after it was left out of a reshuffling of the S&P 500 index on Friday. Then on the flip side, DoorDash will join the S&P 500 on March 24th. Its shares up more than 3.5%. And finally, shares of trading platform Robinhood down 5%. Robinhood Financial, Robinhood Securities, they were fined $26 million by FINRA for violating its rules. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Good morning. Thank you, Lisa. Good morning to all of you across the nation here on your commute this morning, and of course on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. Stunned at outgrowing. Thank you so much for that interest, particularly internationally. Ray YouTube was giving me a lot of guidance on this, as international is really something, particularly over in Asia, the Pacific Rim as well. We're going to digress now. We're going to do this with Lisa Mateo, where all over the weekend there was this word recession. So I guess there's a worry about a recession, and to the late Martin Feldstein of Harvard University, who we lost far too early, Professor Feldstein would say 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, but including Jeffrey Frankel at Harvard, I got a lot of butt on that. Lisa, how do you what's the Mateo recession meter? How do you gauge a recession besides a guy next door lost their job?
I don't know. I go by different things, like when you go to the stores, how crowded they are, things like that. But for me, it's about like what we cut back on and what's that give and take.
Right.
Like, for example, if the price of meat is going up, we need the meat and the chicken in the house.
Right.
So what do you not have instead of that?
Yeah, to me, I mean, that's where we are right now. And do you agree, Paul? This is all within the originality of why we're here. It's all happening at light speed.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I've never seen.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think what you hear from a lot of whether it's economists or strategists or fund managers is just the uncertainty in the marketplace. And obviously, the market doesn't like uncertainty because you don't know how to price it. The Atlanta Fed GDP now minus 2.4%. I mean, it just feels so much different than it did right at, say, the election. Because at the election, Tom, it felt like there were animal spirits out there, palpable sense of optimism, lower taxes, pro-growth strategies, maybe lower regulatory oversight. You can get more M&A, more IPOs. And then it just changed on a dime when all this tariff talk started just dominating the discussion. And there you go with the economic uncertainty. And it's just turned on a dime. And it's unfortunate. And you're seeing it obviously in the financial markets with the S&P off about 7.5% from its high, and the NASDAQ off about 10%.
Paul and I would agree that the debt market is another place to look. 3.95% in the 2-year yield, the 10-year real yield, 1.91% is in 5 basis points. From London, on the transatlantic effect of a pending recession, Kriti Gupta joins us right now. Kriti, I see stability in the German 10-year. I guess I see some stability, but I don't see stability in the rhetoric. From London, what meetings are you watching? Can there be transatlantic meetings this week?
I mean, that seems to be the million-dollar question, because we don't actually know who represents Europe with the United States right now. And it feels like the spotlight keeps shifting. It started off a couple weeks ago with Emmanuel Macron, then Keir Starmer had his moment, Vladimir Zelensky, and of course the disaster in the Oval Office. And now it feels like Germany might be making a little bit of a comeback, at least when it comes to representing Europe and when it comes to this masked fiscal package. They're basically tearing a page out of the Biden playbook, which is you basically look to invest in your hometown.
Does there appear to be some mechanism for fiscal union that Lagarde has spoken about? I don't see it, but could Brussels do fiscal union? Does Strasbourg do fiscal union? Where does it happen?
I mean, if you ask the Europeans, they would say the fiscal union already exists and has since the 1990s. But to your point, Christine Lagarde is being very careful with what the ECB's role actually is when it comes to that defense spending that Germany has completely promised, by the way. We actually just got headlines, Tom, that Germany's kind of parliament isn't able to get that 2/3 majority it needs to unleash the 500 billion euro promise that moved the bond market last week. Here's the problem, though, Tom. The clock is ticking. They've got 2 weeks to really get this past the finish line, and the market is pricing it in as a done deal.
But exactly. That's, Kriti, as usual, you nail it. Paul, everybody in America is talking about this is going to happen, and I believe I just heard the German votes aren't there.
So, Kriti, we were just talking earlier in the surveillance program this morning with some folks in Canada about how Canada, they feel like they're on their own here against the United States. Does the European Union feel like they're on their own vis-a-vis the U.S.?
They absolutely do. And I think the difference here is that the European Union, you're not seeing the same rhetoric that you're seeing out of Justin Trudeau or now Mark Carney about being potentially the 51st state, for example. The European Union is dealing with a series of issues. One is the tariff front, of course, with steel, aluminum, autos. There's even a question of pharmaceutical tariffs that are going to hit potentially the likes of Novo Nordisk. They're also dealing with another front, and that is the overcapacity issues coming out of China. Because if you look at the headlines out of China this morning, it's retaliatory tariffs, it's tariffs on agricultural goods, not just in the United States, but on Canada as well. And a lot of Europeans are looking at that and saying, is this trade war no longer a question of the U.S. and Europe, but Europe and other parts of the world?
Is there a recession? We're just talking about recession talk in America and defining NBER and that. Is there recession talk in Europe, Kriti Gupta?
There has been recession talk in Europe since I've moved to Europe, so almost 2 years, Tom, and I would argue perhaps even longer. There is an argument, I know it feels like just like yesterday, don't miss me too much, but I think it's important here that you mentioned that Germany's already actually hit a technical recession. You look at some of the data, some would argue the UK has as well. They're worried a little bit about if the United States catches a cold, the rest of the world, or the United States catches a cough, the rest of the world catches a flu, or whatever the phrase is. But basically, whatever you see in the States is magnified to the rest of the world. And that's why there's this race to basically isolate and to, I don't want to say cut economic ties, but limit the read-through.
Critty, talk to us about, you mentioned China and agricultural tariffs. I mean, this is going to impact U.S. farmers, is it not?
It's going to in a really, really big way. And this is a completely different approach than the first Trump administration, where you saw him actually negotiate a massive farm deal that included quotas and buying promises from China and the United States. We should remind our global audience that farming in the United States and many other countries is largely subsidized by the government. So the idea here is that if you have tariffs on farms, on agricultural goods, a lot of that's already being subsidized by the fiscal government as well. Now they're talking about going after things like soybeans, corn, wheat. Basically, the heartland of America is basically getting hurt by these Chinese retaliatory tariffs. But they've also gone after other things like cotton, like cattle, and goods that aren't just coming out of the United States, but goods that are coming out of Canada as well. And it's not clear what the end goal is here.
Critty Gupta, thank you so much. On short notice from Queen Victoria Street in London. It's the way we roll, folks, in the 7 o'clock hour. Great to go to Toronto on the Canadian election, to Critty in London as well. Henrietta Treyz scheduled to be with us here in a moment on Washington as we come back to the realities of America. Futures at negative 58, Dow futures negative 388. Paul, I'm going to bring this up numerous times. Chart of the weekend. I'm sorry, I don't know who to give credit to. I'll say Sam Rowe, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's always a good one.
It's a good one,
Yep.
but it's the average stock is down 30%, and the different sectors, the best performing sectors, utilities down 15%. And there's been more agony out there.
Sure, it's
maybe you look at when you look at Apple.
When you look at Apple, you look at the broader across the market here. We're seeing selling pressure across the market. And again, what's changed? The economics outlook is still generally pretty solid, although there's definitely some concerns there as it relates to uncertainty. But earnings have been there. What's really changed, I would argue, over the last 6, 7, 8 weeks has just been this sense of uncertainty in the market as it relates to economic policy. And that's starting to come in the numbers. And Anna Wong from Bloomberg Economics says, you're going to see that first in the second quarter with GDP numbers. And then in the second half of the year, you'll see some of this tariff talk be reflected in inflation data in the second half of the year. So that's how she sees the cadence.
Well, we'll have to see on that. Thank you, Anna Wong, for support on Friday with that great jobs coverage that we put together. Russell 2000 down 18% from the recent peak. That is how we've moved. That's outside 2 standard deviations. Stay with us with futures at negative 61. Bloomberg surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by IBKR. Financial advisors switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges, no conflicts of your interest at IBKR. Bloomberg.com/RIA. Well, we've got futures pointing to a lower open. This is following the worst week for the S&P 500 since September. We'll look at S&P futures down more than 1%. We go to Dow futures down 0.9%. NASDAQ futures down more than 1%. We go to the 2-year yield 3.95%. That's down 4 basis points. And the yield on the 10-year 4.24%, down 5 basis points. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little change. We have more inflation data this week. February's Consumer Price Index on Wednesday. That's followed by producer prices, initial jobless claims on Thursday. Also this morning, shares of Novo Nordisk. They fell the most since December. They're down more than 5% in Copenhagen. This is after results of its latest CagriSema obesity drug trial. It really failed to impress. It showed an only 15.7% weight loss of people with diabetes. Now, Eli Lilly, which makes its rival shot Zepbound, they were higher on the news. Right now, they're down. Their shares are lower, down about 0.8%. And a stock on the move this morning, Checkpoint Therapeutics, shares skyrocketing up 66%. It agreed to be acquired by Sun Pharmaceutical Industries. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
And Lisa, thanks so much. Out on YouTube, live chat. Thank you for the intelligent live chat out there. Sam wants to be a door greeter at Bloomberg.
Oh.
It's a brilliant idea.
Sure, yeah.
Out on 731 Lexington.
Yeah.
Out there, next to Bloomingdale's.
Yep.
Hey, good morning, Sam.
Yeah.
It's a great idea.
That's a great idea.
Hi, welcome to Bloomberg.
Exactly.
It'd be like it'd be softer, kinder.
Yeah, all right. I know a guy. We'll see what we can do
there. Should we
there.
sell hot dogs, Lisa? When you go in Costco, do they have hot dogs right at the front door?
They do, yes.
So
$1.50 gets you a hot dog and a soda, right?
$1.50 from past, I don't even know how many, more than
Are you
decades.
going to talk to Mr. Bloomberg about this?
It would be nice. Yeah.
I think
let's do it.
Hot dog and a soda.
That needs to be in the pantry.
Sam, thank you for that idea. Henrietta Treyz with us right now. She's been with us almost daily, wicked intelligent with Veda Partners on what's going on in Washington. Henrietta, I got 8 ways to go. And folks, I'm not going to mince words. The tape is terrible this morning. Jeff Stein, Dan Diamond, the Washington Post, top story. Everybody in Washington reads it. Trump touted sweeping tariff DOGE plans, then watered down. How long can the White House sustain action and then watered down?
Apparently in perpetuity. It's happened effectively since January 20th, when he, front ran his trade team in the Oval Office that night, said tariffs were coming February 1st, immediately pushed that out to February 4th, kicked it to March, kicked it to later in March, and now here we are on the cusp of the week where we're going to get steel and aluminum tariffs, both at 25%, tariffs on dairy and lumber coming in from Canada, which are going to be massively disruptive and get huge pushback from the home builder industry. I think there's going to be a continued, probably 4-year-long fits and starts on the trade front.
4-year long.
Oh, great.
She's depressing.
Yeah, she is.
I need some tang.
So, Henrietta, should we expect any type of discussion, rhetoric, commentary from our good friends in Congress about global trade?
Yeah, I think that's going to tick up. One of the things that's really noticeable to me in this Republican bill, you were talking about the prospects for a shutdown earlier, there's no bailout for farmers in this package. And if this bill passes, that effectively means there won't be any further subsidization of the U.S. agriculture industry until late September. That's a really long time to weather what is about to be a 15% tariff from China on all of our agriculture sector, and then tariffs on $86 billion worth of goods, mostly pork and beef, fruits and vegetables, orange juice, things like that from Canada as soon as March 25th. So there's a big headwind coming the agriculture sector's way, and that's going to start to spur members to start talking back.
What is the response of Henrietta Treyz's Washington to economic slowdown, sort of kind of like recession, or actual National Bureau of Economic Research recession?
Man, this was incredible data sets from President Trump over the weekend, effectively acknowledging that the $5 trillion in tax preferences that the Republican Party is going to writing right now will not be stimulative. will not be enough to offset the potentiality of a recession driven by global tariffs for the first time since the 1930s. So I think that was a real showing of President Trump's hands and the cards that he's hearing from his economic advisors behind the scenes. The problem is that Ambassador Lighthizer and his current trade and commerce secretaries and treasury secretaries support the tariff agenda, support this whole idea that tariffs are the way to get everything that we want. So I think that's really striking, and everybody should sit with that for a little while.
And, you know, over the weekend, Henrietta, I was thinking about just the political calculus associated with tariffs. If I'm in Des Moines, Iowa, okay, maybe I'm not a farmer, and there's maybe, you know, a handful of big farming conglomerates in Des Moines, Iowa, but everybody in Des Moines, Iowa, in some way, shape, or form is kind of impacted by the health of the farms in Des Moines, Iowa. How is this politically doable for President Trump and his administration? I would think it would be very difficult for them.
You know what's interesting? I feel like it's doable for Trump and the administration because he personally is so popular. Who it's not doable for is the House and Senate Republicans. So I would take Alaska as a perfect example. You have states like Alaska that are heavily federally subsidized, whose veterans are being fired. 331 veterans just in Alaska alone already from DOGE before they even get to this big sweep of 80,000 veterans they're planning to fire and the big sweep of federal employees they're planning to fire over the summer. You have these individual senators and individual House members in swing districts or those votes that have gone back and forth. And those members are already illustrating that they can't weather the storm. They've canceled town halls. Democrats are sort of gleefully pointing that out and holding their own so that those disaffected voters come and speak. I don't think that it's a problem for Trump. I think it's a problem for the rest of the Republican conference. And that means they have a year to get their legislation enacted, and then they'll get shellacked in the midterms, which is normal.
Henrietta, quickly here, the Washington Post talks about firefighter training at FEMA canceled. Bloomberg's got stories of this, that, and the other canceled. This in Forbes, aviation safety at risk among DOGE cuts. Is that true? Do you perceive that the cuts are drifting into airplanes landing at Denver?
That is absolutely true. It's definitely the FAA. I mean, they're cutting everything from that to the Weather Service. So, yes, it's across the board, indiscriminate, completely ad hoc, and inconsistent. And then even adding to the uncertainty, there's reporting out this morning saying, hey, give us your personal email address and your personal cell phone address so we can call you if we mistakenly fired you. So I think there's just a lot of disruption. The jobs reports numbers are going to be a real up and down for the next couple months.
I got that email from Bloomberg this weekend. Henrietta Treyz, thank you so much. Our most valuable guest, most valuable player award.
Yes.
For early 2025. We're late with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Mark Carney has won the race to become Canada's next prime minister, taking over from Justin Trudeau. In his victory speech on CTV, Carney said Canada will keep retaliatory tariffs in place until President Trump shows them respect.
He's attacking Canadian families, workers, and businesses, and we cannot let him succeed. And we won't.
President Trump is downplaying the risk of a recession as he moves ahead on tariffs and government spending cuts. Bloomberg's Laura Davison reports from Washington.
He's called it, used a couple different euphemisms, a transition period, a period of adjustment, a little bit of a disturbance because of these tariffs coming online. Trump is very attuned to what the stock market does day to day. We've seen, equities really continue to fall as companies have gotten concerned about these incoming tariffs.
Bloomberg's Laura Davison. Israel applied more humanitarian pressure on Hamas to release more hostages. It comes as Israel cut off its electricity supply to Gaza, affecting a desalinization plant producing drinking water. Former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, Mick Mulroy, says he is worried about the safety of hostages believed to be still held in Gaza and its civilian population.
It is likely to cause a lot of controversy, as this could seriously impact innocent civilians in Gaza.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Pre-March Madness, we did Big East, St. John's, go get them.
You go get them.
Madison Square Garden, we're ready. Duke, they get a bye, right?
2 buys.
2 buys.
Double bye. Yeah, they're
Tuesday, Wednesday, then Thursday they play somebody they don't know who.
They don't know who they play. Yeah.
What happened this weekend with UNC? Were they
they beat up North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Cooper Flagg didn't play much in the first half because he had 3 fouls. That was the first time he hasn't been on the floor, and they struggled a little bit. but then he came into the second half.
He's
and
that
just took
good.
it. He really is generational. He's certainly a top 5 all-time Duke, if not more than that.
Do you just assume this is it for him?
Oh yeah, and number 1 pick next year in the draft. Number 1.
Number 1 pick.
Yeah, I mean, to me, he's Magic Johnson. That's who I equate him to.
Wow.
He can pass. He can do everything.
Okay, I'll start paying attention to this. I promise, folks. It's Bloomberg Surveillance from New York. Good morning.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines on Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, and Lisa Mateo.
Good morning, everyone. We welcome all of you on a Monday, a fractured Monday, a new touch. S&P futures at -70, Dow futures -451. The market drifts away. We're going to get a 26 print on VIX here in a moment. We need some joy. The newspapers, Lisa Mateo. Lisa, make us laugh.
Well, see, now I'm going to make you not laugh because it's not such an upbeat story. Okay, it's a look into the job market. It's just showing how more older Americans are turning now to blue-collar jobs and side hustles because they're getting squeezed out of the white-collar jobs. They're saying their age, salary expectations, they're being beat out, by younger workers. So they're going into truck driving, custodians. Some are taking part work as security guards, Uber Eats on the side because a lot of them actually still have debt from getting their masters. So they still have to pay off a lot.
And people are living longer.
They're
retiring at, somebody might do it at 61. For example, somebody might try to retire at 61. No,
they can't. They can't.
Just
because you have to save up more and look at how much you have left. And
you
now they're getting
work longer,
laid off earlier.
I was sitting in Prague, the Czech Republic, having a lovely, moonlit dinner all by myself, out in a little cafe, and everyone around me was older and American. This has got to be pushing 25 years ago when Matt Winkler sent me over there, and the answer is I predict thousands of retirees in America will go abroad. Tip of the iceberg here right now.
Yeah,
it's just brutal, and I make no bones about it, folks. I can't afford to retire. Fossils like me are like, you're kidding me. Mr. Bloomberg, good morning. How are you, sir?
Exactly.
It's like that. Next.
Have you ever had beef bourguignon?
Yes.
Did I say it right?
I made it.
You've
Came
made
close.
it.
There's
Really?
a little place on Rue Dauphine right by Hotel d'Aubusson that makes the best beef bourguignon.
I'll take your word
and
for it.
they use Costco utensils. It's cheap. It's the Rooster. It's called.
The Rooster. But you brought but that's the point because it's cheap. Okay, so there's this restaurant in Paris. It's called, stick with me here, Le Bouillon Charter.
Oh, I'm going with that.
In Paris, it's been this destination for cheap French food since 1896.
Oh.
It was on the Netflix show Emily in Paris, so it became popular again. But theirs is, in American dollars, $10.80. And they've kept it that way for 4 years because they want to make it more affordable to people. But they're saying it's harder for them to keep that price because everything is getting expensive. The electricity for the restaurant, the wages for the staff, the price of the beef. So what they're doing instead is when prices soar too much, they'll drop certain items from the menu, like the beef, bourguignon, or however you say it is. Sometimes they'll take it off for a week and then they'll bring it back, because if it gets too expensive. But I need to try this.
I know.
It sounds delicious.
I haven't been to Paris in a long time. I need to get over there. I mean, I got. But where's the euro now? 108. I missed my shot at
your
103,
shot.
102
Trust
on
me.
the euro. Yeah.
Next.
And finally, Tom, I think I'm going to have to go for the super big cart at Costco because usually I keep mine to like a one cart. Maybe I'll grab another.
Oh,
but
you
they
lie.
have,
I've seen you with 2 carts.
but they have the big trolleys, and I think I have to go for it because they're massive 100-inch TVs. They're a
100?
huge hit. 100-inch. Do you need a TV that big? I don't know. But they're about $1,500 to about $3,500. That's the range for them.
And they're selling like hotcakes.
And they're selling like crazy. People are buying them up, one, because social media made them popular and people started unboxing these because the box is like ungodly. Like it's huge. And so people started posting this. But they're saying, what's interesting is that the shift in Costco, like the people who come through the store are now wealthier. So they're putting in a lot more of these higher end products into Costco now, like a $400,000 diamond ring.
They got TVs everywhere at the ShopRite on Route 35 in Wall Township. They have those big, massive TVs just sitting there by the checkout. Oh, yeah, I'll take that.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It's fascinating. Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. The newspapers this morning. Futures at -70, Dow futures -441. In honor of Canada, thank you, Mr. DeCloet, for being with us from Toronto. Where do you start in Canada? Quebec.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
What's the immediate take of a tariff war?
For the longest time, technology has been the driver of this market.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Trump declared a national emergency at the U.S. border with Mexico.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. It's simple. Markets deteriorate. Moments ago, futures -70, Dow futures -438, the VIX through 26.05. I don't see a bid yet, Paul, this morning. I mean, that's what we're looking for.
I don't see a bid yet here, Tom, here in the futures market here. And I'm looking at the bond market. The 10-year Treasury's up 15.36, pushing the yield down 6 basis points, 4.25 on your 10-year Treasury, Tom.
2-year 3.94. Sweeney trying to get the mortgage rate under 6%. We'll see if we get there. The 10-year real yield, it's not yet back to new lows like a 189, 188, but I do have a 1.92 on the 10-year real yield. That's in 4 basis points for the pros out there this morning. Dollar weaker. I've got some yen strength, and I looked at, yes, I do look at yen yuan. How about that?
Yep.
I didn't look at Naki Stocky. I'm sorry. Sarah didn't do that. But the answer is we got foreign exchange on the movement. Mexican peso does show fractional strength this morning. Bloomberg surveillance for you across the nation. We're brought to you by BAM Mutual. They insure municipal bonds that finance essential infrastructure and provide guaranteed income to improve any portfolio. Learn more about municipal bond credit quality. Learn more about municipal bond credit quality. Visit BAM Bonds. Paul demands I spell that BAMBONDS.com. Lindsey, oh no, I got to go to Lisa. Excuse me, I was so dazzled by Celine Dion. I wanted to go to Lindsey Piegza. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash needed Lisa Mateo.
You got it. And we had that rebound on Friday. And this morning, futures really taking a hit. We have NASDAQ futures leading the losses down nearly 1.5%, 291 points. Dow futures down more than 1%, 436 points. We have S&P futures down more than 1%, 71 points. Want to go to yields? The yields are falling too. Investors looking to the safety of fixed income assets. So you have the 2-year yield, 3.95%. That's down 5 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.24%. That's down 5 basis points. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little change. Tesla, Nvidia leading the losses among the Mag 7 stocks. Tesla's down about 3%. Feeling the pressure from BYD's rapid rise. Yeah, Tesla shipments in China, they've been falling for 5 consecutive months. A 49% drop in February retaliatory compared to last year. We go to NVIDIA shares off 2%. Now, since we mentioned NVIDIA, I want to go to Broadcom because their shares are off more than 2%, on pace to kind of hand back some of Friday's gains after those strong earnings that it reported. After the closing, move on to Oracle. Investors are going to be waiting for any AI news from them. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Continued deterioration, futures at negative 71. Now with Stifel Chicago, Lindsey Piegza joins us. Lindsey, how do you define recession? If it is an NBER, what's a Piegza recession look like?
Well, I think we're looking for 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. But frankly, when we get to a non-accelerating economy with growth falling anywhere near less than 1%, you're kind of splitting hairs at that point.
Thank you.
The economy would clearly be struggling with inflation still very elevated at this point.
You nailed the elevation. How do you feel about economic growth? Can you even look out 3 months, 9 months, a year and a half, given everything hinged on policy?
Well, it is very difficult at this point. When we look at in hindsight, we see that the footing for the U.S. economy is still very solid. Consumer spending, businesses still investing, but there's an incredible amount of uncertainty and volatility coming down the pipeline, which could very easily shake away that solid footing that we've seen in the economy for quite some time now.
So, Lindsey, is stagflation a concern?
Actually, stagflation is the biggest concern. I don't think a recession or an outright decline is really my primary focus, but a period of stagflation as the Fed's lack of commitment to reining in price pressures could eventually choke off the upside potential for the U.S. economy, leaving us, again, we're splitting hairs, whether or not we fall into negative territory. The risk is that we see growth slow from this 2% pace to 1% to less than 1%, with nominal price pressures still up at 3-ish%. Slow growth, elevated prices, the very definition of stagflation.
So what are you seeing in the labor market here today, Lindsey? Because that's kind of the front lines for how people are feeling about the economy.
Well, the labor market is still somewhat solid, but showing signs of volatility and uncertainty. Now, most of the weakness that we have seen has been the result of tragic weather events, the fires in California, unfavorable weather scenarios in the Mid-Atlantic and the East Coast. But there was also a sizable decline in services hiring as of late, which could in part reflect the fact that the federal government has made moves to shrink the size of government, reduce federal employees, sever government contracts. And so this could be the tip of the iceberg in terms of that downward pressure on the labor market as a result of these new initiatives.
I mean, Lindsey Piegza with us with Stifel for a lengthy conversation here this morning. She was fabulous last year in gaming out a Fed that would stay higher on their rate because of inflation. As Paul mentioned, stagflation really front and center. What do you observe from the distance of the Midwest? I mean, when we say slowdown, and I totally take your point, Lindsey, on 1% is a recession for 2/3 of America, 3/4, whatever. But is it a goods slowdown or a service sector slowdown?
It would be a service sector slowdown, which has really been the engine of the economy at this point. So I do think that if we saw that precipitous decline in activity, broad-based activity, it would primarily be a reflection of that pullback in services, both on the hiring side, but also the expenditure side. And we've already seen consumers exhibit this rising level of concern amid a very uncertain outlook, pulling back on what they're purchasing over the course of the past 2 months. So really setting us up for a potential self-inflicted, if you will, downturn in terms of consumer activity being sidelined as a result of this tremendous amount of uncertainty coming from fiscal policy.
So, Lindsey, have you guys changed your GDP forecast here recently?
We haven't necessarily changed our forecast, but we have added to the downside risks to our forecast. It's still too soon to say exactly what the impact is going to be of the latest initiatives from the Trump administration. But I do think that the downside risk to growth, the upside risk to inflation, we're starting to see that spread increase, which could compound a less favorable outlook for the economy, at least in the near term.
How does the stock market fit in? If you look at, any core, like first term economics major, non-economics major text, the stock market, Lindsey Piegza, shows up about chapter 23. How do you fold a declining stock market? Futures now negative 80, Dow futures negative 481, the VIX out almost three big figures. How does that fold into confidence in the animal spirit?
Well, I think that reinforces the concern and the lack of optimism that the market has right now for the U.S. economy broadly to continue to perform without this ongoing strength propelled by the consumer, which again really propped up the economy over the past couple of years. So this underscores the uncertainty and the volatility and the lack of confidence that investors and consumers have looking forward over the next couple of quarters.
All right, so Lindsey, where do you think we'll see some of this, I guess, just uncertainty in the marketplace caused by, in part, by some of this talk on tariffs, talks on change of immigration policy? Will it be in growth, GDP numbers, or will it be in inflation? Where do you think we'll see it first, if at all?
Well, it's going to take some time to filter into the inflation numbers. So the tariffs that are enacted today are going to take probably 2 to 3 months to filter into the inflation numbers. So there is a sizable lag. In terms of the growth aspects, we would expect that more of a near-term reaction, consumers reacting in anticipation of those potential increases. We would also see businesses at the start of the year already increasing inventories, again, in anticipation of that potential implementation and potential impact of tariffs. So I think we're going to see that in the growth numbers first and foremost before we actually see the realized impact on prices.
Lindsey, Northwestern University in Chicago, they have their acclaimed transportation center. Right now, the transportation center between whoever wins a Canadian election and President Trump is a bridge between Detroit and Windsor, Ontario. You've got a visceral knowledge of that. How do you describe to mere mortals the trade tension across that frozen river?
Oh, it's quite intense. But remember, it was not long after that tariff was announced that the Trump administration did grant an exemption for the auto sector for a period of 1 month amid massive pleas from several large automakers that these tariffs would cause severe supply chain disruptions, could result in significant price increases. So the sense of immediacy in terms of that rollback, that exemption period, really underscores the sensitivity and importance of that relationship on both sides.
We get to April. I mean, the Red Sox are winning the first week of April. Season's over by fourth week of April. Lindsey Piegza, are we going to see, do you just assume with the dynamics and knowledge and facts you have right now that, Ford or GM or Stellantis Chrysler's going to dial 1-800-TRUMP and say we're laying off X thousands of people on Tuesday? Is that what we're going to see in May or June?
Well, we certainly could be, and it could be used as a negotiating tactic. But at the same time, the Trump administration has been clear that a period of adjustment is expected, that temporary disruptions are expected. And the bottom line comes down to the Trump administration wants to be able to level the playing field. And if that comes at the consequence of the auto sector, I think the administration may be willing to sacrifice that, at least in the near term, to ensure a better, longer-term trade agreement with our neighbors to the north.
They're going to. I'm making the number up, folks. I'm not qualified. They're going to sacrifice 20,000 jobs in the greater Piegza Midwest to get some national thing done. I see no history that's occurred.
I don't think that we have to go to the extreme where we see a complete shutdown of the industry, but maybe there's some room for negotiation. The tariffs that were put in place, the 25%, maybe that's too elevated for the auto sector. Maybe we see some sort of exclusion, as we saw with Canadian energy, which will have a lower tariff of 10%. Maybe the Trump administration would be willing to negotiate lower. But again, it comes down to the resolve of the administration to enforce these tariffs to ensure a longer-term, more even playing field with our international trading partners. And I think if some jobs are lost, if some uncomfortability for the economy occurs, I think the administration is willing to take that medicine.
Can I editorialize?
Yeah, go for it.
My head hurts.
Yes, exactly. Hey, Lindsey, given all this backdrop here that we've been talking about, how's the U.S. consumer these days?
Well, the U.S. consumer is on relatively solid footing if we look at their financial condition. When we look at the amount of debt accumulation, yes, it has ramped up massively, particularly with credit cards at $1.2 trillion in terms of outstanding balances. But when we put that in the perspective of the health of the balance sheet, so the ratio of debt payments relative to disposable income, we're still talking about a multi-decade low. So the ability for the consumer to continue to spend and borrow is certainly there, but the willingness is beginning to get chipped away, again, amid all of this uncertainty of these different policies coming down the pipeline.
Dr. Piegza, thank you so much. My Economist of the Year last year, she absolutely nailed a Fed reticent to cut interest rates. Right now, futures, we had a negative 80 print, now negative 79. Dow futures getting out near negative 500, negative 478. VIX out almost 3 big figures as well, over a 26 level. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. A former governor of Canada's central bank and the Bank of England has been chosen as the new leader of the country's Liberal Party and, by extension, its next prime minister. Mark Carney was blunt in his assessment of relations with the United States.
These are dark days. Dark days brought on by a country we can no longer trust.
Carney is expected to be sworn in as Canadian Prime Minister within the next few days and take over for Justin Trudeau. Saudi Arabia is set to host talks tomorrow between the U.S. and Ukraine following last month's row during President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to the White House. President Trump says he's mostly lifted an intelligence sharing pause on Ukraine after Russia's recent attacks. It comes as U.S. and Ukrainian officials will likely talk about a crucial mineral rights deal. Bloomberg's Laura Davison has more from Washington.
This indicates that he thinks that there is a mineral deal that could be signed, as soon as this week. U.S. and Ukrainian officials are meeting in Saudi Arabia to discuss this deal. One of the leverage points he had was saying, look, we're going to restrict this intelligence sharing, saying, his indication that he has rolled this back suggests that he thinks that a deal could come together. Zelensky will be there in Saudi Arabia. He won't be initially involved in these talks, but both sides seem to be willing to at least come to the table and reach a deal here.
Bloomberg's Laura Davison in the nation's capital. South Korea's military says North Korea has fired several ballistic missiles into the sea. The launch today happened hours after South Korean and U.S. troops kicked off their large annual combined drills. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
This is really important. Lisa, jump in here, please. Here's the quote from the Financial Times. You cannot replicate a genuine Parmigiano Reggiano or Brie de Meaux. There's an X on the end, but it's Meaux, I think. They're going through the tariff impact of the cheese we buy and the olive oil. I mean, Javier Blas had to be medicated in London.
He's a big fan of the Spanish olive oil.
The Spanish olive oil
Italian olive oil
could be the tariffs. If
they go after my Barbaresco, we're going to have a problem here. That's going to be an issue.
Do they import Budweiser?
I don't know. I think it comes from Newark, maybe. I don't know.
The headline here from...
And champagne.
Champagne and Parmigiano. It's not it's like the Parmesan we get at Costco. Like Lisa's buying the oil drum of Parmesan cheese. That's not what we're talking about, like the fancy one when they scrape it on your $70 pasta.
But it goes back to what I said before. Sometimes you got to trade off. Like if something's getting too expensive,
how do you substitute this stuff?
You suck it up. You have to
but I'm
save
really
money.
into my Barbaresco these days.
Are you?
And
Okay.
Nebbiolo grape. I mean, it's all good. So if they start tariffing that stuff, then we're going to have an international incident.
I don't know.
What's the cheap champagne? How do you switch down from that? That's what I'm talking right there.
Prosecco. I mean,
yeah, okay.
We have champagne. We serve the company Prosecco. I'm kidding.
The guests get the Prosecco.
I'm kidding. No, remember Cold Duck?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Boulder, Colorado, after the sink.
Yep.
Her name was Stephanie. That's all I remember. With Cold Duck. Oh, that was terrible. Anyways, that's where we are this morning, folks. We got to do a data check here. I mean, Paul, negative 80 here. Dow futures negative 42. The VIX is at 3 big figures. I mean, there's no bid.
Yeah, no, there's no bid. And you look at the tech stocks here, we're sitting, right there at 19,900. That's off 330 points on the NASDAQ, 1.6%. So again, really taking it in the chin here. Looking at the Treasury market here, Tom, the 10-year Treasury off 7 basis points. We're now at 4.22%. On the 10-year Treasury here. So, and I'm going to call out Bitcoin. I know you were just about to jump on it. It's actually, kind of a little bit higher here today, but it's up about 0.25%, 83,000. But again, nowhere near that 107,000 level we had before. Gold just kind of hanging in there, Tom, $2,900. It's at, for a lot of people, the safe haven kind of trade here in the world gone a little bit uncertain here. Yeah. Certainly in the near term, gold has kind of been holding its value.
Stay with Bloomberg through the day on Bloomberg Radio. Good morning, 99.1 FM in a fractured Washington, 92.9 FM in Boston, Bloomberg 1130 in New York. Stay with us today across the nation and on YouTube. Just a lot of good conversations. And frankly, Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney, Balance of Power, Tim and Carol in the afternoon, all doing the same thing. We don't have to worry about it because nobody's awake in Washington except Nathan Hager.
Exactly.
I mean, he's literally, he's the only one that goes across a bridge in the morning. But the answer is through the day, you got to believe they got to respond to this.
Yeah, it's President Trump has said, hey, there's going to be a transition period here. There's going to be some pain in the near term, and
we're going to transition to 5% unemployment rate.
I don't know. It's getting a little bit dicey out there. The financial markets are clearly reflecting the uncertainty. It's as simple as that. Whether there's long-term gain to be had remains to be seen. But in the near term, the market's reflecting uncertainty.
I would suggest, folks, nowhere in my study of American economic history do you transition during an economic slowdown.
Yep.
And it just simply comes down to, the ancient thing. Do I have a job? Does my neighbor have a job? Et cetera. I mean, that's where we are. From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses. Oracle offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. For new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment, offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. We've got futures in the red this morning. This is concerns over the health of the economy weighing on investors' appetite for risk. We had the Fed's Mary Daly said that growing uncertainty among businesses, well, it could slow demand in the U.S. economy, but does not need a change in interest rates. That has futures, though, under pressure. We have NASDAQ futures down more than 1.5%. S&P futures down more than 1%. Same for Dow futures. The 2-year yield 3.93%, down 6 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.23%, down 7 basis points. The commodity spot gold $2,902 an ounce. And we go to Brent crude, $70 a barrel. WTI crude, $67 a barrel. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little change. Few companies making news. 7-I, they're in talks with Couche-Tard to address those antitrust concerns over the potential buyout. Then President Trump saying he's negotiating with 4 different buyers for TikTok's U.S. business and that a deal may come, quote, soon. And finally, the Wall Street Journal saying the latest string of CVS stores will be smaller and go all in on pharmacy. They'll be about 5,000 square feet. Full-service pharmacies, over-the-counter medication, but what will not be there? Well, that'll be less beauty products, groceries, greeting cards. They're starting to make a difference. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
They're closing the drugstore near my house. Put up signs. It closes literally in 5 days.
Mom and pop, or is it a chain?
Mom and pop, and to me, it's because 80% of what you want is behind a lock and a key.
Right.
That's as simple as I can make it.
Is that the new normal in retail, I guess? I don't know.
They're getting killed. They're getting killed. I went to a fancy place yesterday. I was blindfolded, and Mrs. Keene walked me down the block, and when we went in the door, they had to unlock the door. How sad is that? And I'm, there's no theft except there is. That's a new world. What we need is a brief on what the rest of the world thinks of this, and we do that on a Bloomberg through our data. No one is better at this than Damian Sassower. I'm just going to cut to the chase. I looked at Eurozloty, which is a poll. Lisa, please, it's not. Look, I'm protecting our FCC license. Okay,
it is Eurozloty, by the way.
Eurozloty is not profanity. Sparta, stay with me. Okay, Euro Polish currency.
Yes.
And I have a ginormous 15% move over the last year and a half, strong Eastern Europe. Is that the place to be?
Yeah, it's a leverage play on the EU, right? I mean, I think the one narrative that the markets missed coming into 2025 was, the fiscal deficit in Germany, the spending out of the EU, and now we're kind of just watching the Bundestag. It's unbelievable. I can't believe we're watching the Bundestag again. But the leverage play on European growth resurgence is the CE3. Now,
but is that the old story?
Well, I mean, it is. I mean, but look, it's not just Poland, Czech, and Hungary, right, which are the 3 largest that have 75-80% of their exports are tied to the greater EU. I mean, it's Croatia, it's Estonia, it's Romania, it's Slovenia, it's Slovakia. There's of the 11 European constituents within the benchmark Bloomberg Global Aggregate Bond Index, 10 are up at over 3% year to date. I mean, this is crazy. So you don't see bonds in Europe, kind of rising at that measure over the first, I guess less than a quarter this year. So yeah, that's what we're looking at.
So what is the call for Eastern Europe? What is the investor bullishness on Eastern Europe?
Their currencies are a leverage play on the euro. And euro-US dollar has obviously been rallying. I think it's up over 3% year to date. And now you got these.
So if Europe's going to spend more on stuff.
Yeah.
Eastern Europe's going to benefit.
That's right, because they export all of it. Yeah, exactly. That's right. Everything's outsourced to Central and Eastern Europe, right? The CE3. So that's one thing we're looking at, obviously. Yeah. I mean, look, the Bloomberg Dollar Index is down 3.2% year to date, so you're getting the bonus from that. And look, I mean, Brent crude, I think it dipped below $70 last week, right? Yeah. So, I mean, now you've got like the floor below the unknown of where commodity prices head from here. And look, it's still this overhang of tariffs, which I know you guys are bored of talking about, but, steel and aluminum are on track for Wednesday. Markets are focused on that. But, I do think by and large, markets are moving away from those U.S.-centric narratives.
Really? But you mentioned the Bundestag. Isn't all of Europe waiting to react to the Oval Office? So is your world completely a function of single Bloomberg headlines from
the German Greens? Well, look, the German Greens, it was just maybe an hour ago that the markets really traded off of. The German Greens won't support, Frederick Merz's draft debt package or something like that. And so all of a sudden you see the euro kind of reverse. So, I mean, markets are definitely trading on those news stories.
Right.
It's not just about tariffs. It's not just about, Powell and the Fed anymore.
Futures go -79 to -81. This is Kevin Hassett, expected negative Q1 due to Biden and timing of tariffs. The National Economic Director for the President, Kevin Hassett, goes on to say Q2 will, quote, take off, unquote, after tax cuts. The market voted -83 on futures.
So in your market, emerging markets, I'm trying to just remember what you just said. you're seeing investors move away from a U.S. exceptionalism trade?
Yes, exactly. And I think, look, of the 60, this is amazing. Just here's a stat for you. There are 61 countries within the Bloomberg Global Aggregate Bond Index, developed and emerging markets, Paul. They're all up on the year, all up. And they're all being dragged higher by, obviously, high-yielding emerging market economies in Latin America, but more importantly, in Eastern Europe. So, emerging markets are behaving really, really well amid all the uncertainty that's out there, which is kind of unusual, you know, I mean, given the high beta nature of the asset class. So, I would argue that, wow, that would have surprised a lot of people. It's certainly surprising me that they're actually holding on to these games. Look at Chinese equities. I mean, I hate to look at equities, and certainly Chinese equities up 20% year to date. I mean, so, it's all kind of, I think, Amy Wu Silverman was on earlier, and I think she makes a really, really good point in that the risk reward and options market makes it more attractive to hedge right now. Call premiums are rich. You're going to see call right strategies. You're going to see put and put spreads. I think the correction's been orderly, but this no panic, this no fear, this no contagion into credit markets is really what's driving some of the returns you're seeing in EM, I think.
So if this is a trend, whether it's EM trend or Dow Jones Industrial Average trend, how does Damien Sassower know when to step in? I mean,
I shouldn't have bought ASML and Marvell, I guess, a few months ago. But, look, I mean, on the downtip in AI stocks, but I think it's been very orderly. There's not been this contagion into credit markets.
That's what Amy said.
And that's what we got to watch. I mean, that's what you're watching for. I mean, I think the SFA, the big, asset-backed conference that, the Big Short, if you remember, if you've ever seen The Big Short, the movie, that just took place out in Las Vegas. 10,000 people showed up. I mean, the most ever since, the height of 2007. And what does that tell you? It tells you that there's a lot of, look, this is CLOs, this is, leverage, this is credit markets, the fact that people are lulled to bed perhaps by the fact that, the financial system is so stable that there's not any pockets of distress that are waiting right around the corner. People have pushed back their maturity walls. Credit markets are healthy. John Gray's calling for, office, real estate to come back, I mean, it's pretty unbelievable.
So, you mentioned China, the stocks are up. Are your investors, your emerging markets investors, are they changing their tone on China? And if so, how?
I think China's a trade. I think it's obviously...
It's a trade to the upside.
It's a very, very momentum-driven market because it doesn't take much to push it one way or the other. And it's, there's official buying that goes on there. And by official buying, I mean Beijing. And so, it's about, I just think it's about the fact that you really can't afford not to own it if you're an emerging market investor because it's a way to kind of make money really, really quickly with a little bit of, relatively low risk if you position accordingly.
I mean, you're completely wired in this tumult that we see. Futures down negative 85. We're out three big figures of the VIX. Did the hedge funds get this right? Did the fancy people you play golf with, did they get this right? Are losses being taken?
I think, you're going into the right part of the, that question's awesome because the basis trade, the easy money, these alpha engines is what I like to call them, the core of a hedge fund,
Exactly.
So if you look at index arbitrage, which is the core of what Millennium does, I think it lost a lot of money for them in the first quarter. That doesn't mean that Izzy and the guys are down, year to date, they're actually up. But I mean, like these sort of core, highly leveraged, trades or strategies in hedge fund land don't appear to be working the way they used to. And so if they're not generating the cash they used to in years past, where are they going to turn to for alpha? And are they going to take more risk at different parts of the curve? And how is that going to impact credit markets?
Okay, I got 20 seconds. Then looking forward, do they see this as an opportunity? Or are they under their desks or playing golf with you on your Tuesday to Friday?
Well, I mean, I think, like I said, if they want to play golf, they could because hedges are cheap. Even with Silverman, just hedge up, buy some S&P puts and let's mail it in and I'll talk to you in the summer. So I don't know, I mean, the weather here in New York's going to be 60 this week. So Tom.
That's what matters. Yes. Damien Sassower, see you on the golf course. Thank you so much, of course, driving EM coverage for Bloomberg. All of our economics, including that terrific Jobs Day coverage. Thank you, Claudia Sam. Thank you, Ellen Zentner, Rebecca Patterson, and always. It's brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor to staff ratio. Small firm attentiveness, big advisor impact. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about their consultative support and technology. Commonwealth, thank you so much. Sassower driving the market lower, futures negative 86. Stay with us from New York City. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts on YouTube. It's Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Matei. We've got futures pointing to a lower open. This is following the worst week for the S&P 500 since September. S&P futures down nearly 1.5%, 82 points. Dow futures down more than 1%, 494 points. And NASDAQ futures down more than 1.5%, 349 points. The two-year yield, 3.93%, down 7 basis points. And the yield on the 10-year, 4.23%. That's down 7 basis points. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about a 0.1%. Bitcoin down about a 0.1% at just over 82,000. More inflation data out this week. February's consumer price index on Wednesday. That's followed by producer prices, initial jobless claims on Thursday. This morning, shares of Novo Nordisk fell the most since December. It's down about 6% in Copenhagen. This is after results of its latest CagriSema obesity drug. It really failed to impress. It showed only 15.7% weight loss of people with diabetes. Now, you look at Eli Lilly, which makes that rival shot Zepbound. Their shares down more than 1%. And another company making news, that would be Ford. The Financial Times saying it's going to inject up to 4.4 billion pounds of new capital into its German unit. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. So many worries in retail. What's America can do? And of course, futures here negative 84 right now. It's just terrible out there, except there's a hole in the ground on Fifth Avenue in the 40s. IKEA's going to build a zillion square feet with Extel. Then you walk up the street. Prada's expanding out there, literally out on the sidewalk yesterday, putting up that light gray Prada expansion. Nice. Louis Vuitton's got 14 stories.
Is that the pronunciation you like?
That is the correct pronunciation. Okay. And then if you back up from that, you go into Bulgaria and you look at the fancy Serpenti watches, and they announced they're doing a redo. Joining us, the Queen of Fifth Avenue, Dana Telsey, this morning. Dana, retail's terrible. Kering's losing money. Ferragamo's in the tank. Why are they all spending hundreds of millions on real estate?
Keep in mind, one of the things that happened is when you think about Prada and some of the others who've bought buildings on Fifth Avenue, and like you said, look what Louis Vuitton is doing, there's only one place, and there's not many big streets in the world where you can have that showcase and that display. And so they've bought these luxury brands the ability to control their own destiny with these real estate landmarks. And frankly, it allows them to showcase their goods the way they want, to decorate, to show the visuals. And you don't have another Fifth Avenue out there. And you're seeing them do this, whether it's in Paris, in Tokyo on the Ginza, Bond Street in London. It matters.
Are they recession resistant?
Good call.
Luxury brands are never totally recession resistant. They do have higher margins, but you go through ebbs and flows, and we're certainly seeing it now. We're not having the Chinese consumer come in and spend and travel like they used to. These companies can manage through it, but they don't have the growth rates like they did a few years ago. The only company who's still doing double-digit growth, hats off to Hermes, given the fact that their product overall is limited in quantity and the price increases do not bother that Hermes customer.
So, did you see my bow tie this morning?
I did see.
This is like literally the first one that was bought. It was a lot cheaper than they are now.
Oh, I know. Exactly. My ties are Hermes, although I don't wear ties anymore. Dana,
it was noted out on YouTube. Exactly. They're all bent out of shape.
Exactly. Dana, talk to us about the Chinese consumer. Is this a permanent or semi-permanent change? Because they used to be such a driver for the luxury market globally. Has that fundamentally changed?
Since COVID, it certainly has been weaker. We'll have to see if the economy in China improves, that gets them traveling again. We know that there is demand for luxury, and now you have certain specific brands in China that are Chinese that they're attracted to, but we need the overall driver of consumption spending in China to accelerate. And they're trying to get different population groups to do that, but it certainly hasn't been evident in the numbers coming out of the luxury brands lately. What you have seen is the Europeans and the Americans, and frankly, look what LV just announced last week. They're going to be debuting this fall the new entry into the beauty category with makeup. Pat McGrath is doing 55 lipsticks, lip balms, eyeshadows. That's going to be the new entry.
Wow. Okay. All right. Outside of luxury, how's U.S., broadly speaking, how's the retail business been?
The way I'd frame the consumer earnings season so far is that fourth quarter was good. First quarter guidance that companies are giving are below consensus estimates, with the annual guidance expected to show an uptick. It is frenetic. That's the only way I can describe it. You're going from one thing to another with all the macro data points, whether it was the weather, the wildfires, and now you're seeing the pace of spending. It's normalizing because the weather's getting a little bit normal, but companies have to deal with tariffs and what prices are going to look like. Look where what Walmart's getting, the biggest increases from their higher income customers. I think consumers today, brand leaders and value are what they're focused on.
And this is the opportunity. Joe Feldman at Telsey Advisory Group with Dana Telsey has Costco popping 16% with an outperform. Is the opportunity there, Dana, for revenue persistency, same-store sales persistency, and ample free cash flow?
Look what you have. You have that at Costco. Look what you're seeing at the off-pricers like at TJX. Look at the improvement in Burlington. Value matters, and value like what a Walmart can give, what a TJX can give. You look at their prices, that's what's appealing to today's consumer, who frankly is first going to see more of their expenses go up in price, not down.
So what are you telling your clients, Dana, about tariffs in general and the impact on retail?
There is an impact on retail coming from tariffs. China, Canada, and Mexico, China obviously being the most important. We've done charts of who has some of the greater and least exposure. We're seeing companies, particularly on the soft line side, included in their earnings guidance. And they can only include it as for what's announced as of now. You don't know what's coming next week or later today or whatever it may be.
Yep.
But the ability with collaborations and partnerships to drive differentiation in assortments and media marketing helps to leverage. But it is a tougher world on expenses today than it was last year. What'll change in the second half of the year, some of the freight costs should come down. It's more of a headwind in the first half of the year.
Interesting. What did you see the last Trump presidency when we experienced a similar round of tariffs? What were your retail companies able to do in terms of passing along those price increases versus maybe taking it in their margin?
A couple of things companies did. Number one, they shared the pain with the manufacturers. Number two, they diversified sourcing. And number three, they raised prices. You have to raise the prices. So we saw them raise prices, maybe not a significant amount, but enough. And companies will do that again.
Right.
It all depends on the magnitude.
Your single best buy, Dana Telsey, this morning.
Oh, I think the off-pricers, Burlington and TJX.
Okay, Dana, thank you so much. Terrific brief and just amazing with her heritage on Fifth Avenue at Bergdorf Goodman.
Well, TJX, we got. Lisa's a big fan. Alex Steele's a big fan.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's at work. That's what I follow.
Plus, I used to have a good lunch. I used to go to lunch with them all the time where they sold the propaganda. And good morning up in Boston and Framingham, TJX. Bloomberg surveillance this morning were brought to you by IBKR. Will the U.S. Consumer Sentiment Index, will it exceed 70.3 this March of 2025? At IBKR Forecast Trader, the yes was recently at 29%. Check the data, spot the trends. Start predicting today at ibkr.com/forecast. I was sort of stunned by the construction that you see on Fifth Avenue. I mean, you wouldn't know there was a recession, I'll tell you that.
No, I mean, and again, as Dana was saying, I mean, there's only one Fifth Avenue, so you got to, if you want to, invest, that's a place to go. But again, the luxury business, I've always understood it's really dependent in large part on China, but it seems like the industry's kind of come to a new understanding that China's not going to be, at least in the near term, the growth driver until we see maybe a pickup in that economy.
I would suggest there's different luxury businesses. One, Sarah Eisen introduced me to Ferragamo.
Oh, okay.
And they're really struggling. They came
styling.
out with earnings today that were just grim.
Oh, really?
I mean, it ain't happening.
Okay.
And I wouldn't pretend to understand
I think the luxury business is a little bit like the movie business. You got to have some good product out there. And
exactly.
get that Dana tells he's excited.
Or the record business. Right?
Yep.
Yep. Be another. Anyways, some effervescence over here off Lexington over to Madison and Fifth Avenue this morning. Futures just flat out deteriorate from negative 65. We're now negative 82, down 1.6%, 1.4% make that on the S&P. The VIX out three big figures, 26.36. From New York City, Bloomberg surveillance.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Futures on the move. We're negative 82 now, negative 76. A little bit of a bounce, but by no means am I going to qualify that we've got a bid to the market. The VIX down three big figures, out through 26, 26.22. Paul noting the correlation. The fixed income, Paul, what are you looking at?
Yeah, just looking at this market here, bonds.
10-year, six basis
bonds moving
points.
higher. We got yields coming in yet again. The 10-year Treasury, Tom, in about 6 basis points, 4.24%. Tom, on your 10-year.
We're going to look at some of the stocks right now and feature one of them on the move today. We're joined by Bloomberg's Isabel Lee here. What is DoorDash? Is it a compendium of things, or like if I get Seamless in New York, is that DoorDash?
It's not, but DoorDash is a compendium of things. I like that word.
I can't spell it, but continue.
It is a food delivery service. It's actually the biggest in the U.S. by market share. It went public in 2020, and in October, it posted its first quarterly operating profit since 2020. So that's a sign of really consumer resilience. So you can probably bucket it together with Uber Eats or Seamless, but that's DoorDash, and it got added in the S&P 500 last Friday. Yes, at 5:15. That was my Friday night.
Wow. I'm looking at market cap. It's a $73 billion market cap company. Holy cow.
Did you own it 50 to 200?
I wish.
No.
Stocks up 6% year to date, up 35% over the trailing 12 months.
In a one-year basis, it's doing better than its rivals, Uber, Lyft, but on a year-to-date basis, not quite. But still, this is probably the pop that it will need because inclusion in the benchmark is becoming really more important. It elevates a company's profile. And now in today's age where passive investing is really all the rage, then, I mean, if you own the S&P, you're forced to own it.
I mean, the free cash flow is jaw-dropping.
Yep.
And the
Yep.
400
Good point.
people following this thing.
Yep.
I mean, this is like fancy tech San Francisco, right? All the people that have the black shoes with the white soles, they have to own DoorDash, right?
Probably with the vests, and then
And the vest, yeah.
Yep.
they leave work
Damien
by
Cesar,
4.
yeah.
32 buys,
Would you like
Tom.
to step in here?
Do you
No,
do you do DoorDash or Uber Eats?
Well, yeah, because I was talking to one of the executives at Macy's, and they were saying they use DoorDash.
Oh.
So women are going on these fancy, events, and if they forget something or whatever, they DoorDash whatever they need to their hotel suite, and there it is.
Wow.
So it's,
all right, this is
that's how much
on
it's growing.
this
It's crazy.
my number 4 offspring, who's still a little bit on the dole. He once used DoorDash. He lost his credit card privileges for 2 weeks. I shut him down. I will never pay for that stuff.
Yeah, are they really going to pop a 20% revenue growth rate?
Yeah, I'm looking at the FA function, Tom, and it's got, 20% growth in 2025, 20% growth in revenue in 2026. So, this company's doing really well, isn't it?
Yes, and it's interesting to see because this is really powered by gig economy workers. And of course, that's all the rage that was in the headlines a lot of the times in the past few years because these companies aren't really known to generate profit. We know that most of these just really they're more after the bottom line, and they just really want to grow and grow and grow. So this is a good sign for DoorDash. And of course, again,
So when something gets added to the S&P 500, what happens? Like, people got to buy the stock, right? If I'm marked to the S&P 500, if that's my index, my benchmark, I got to own this thing, right?
It really increases your profile. And again, you have to own it. You're forced to own it. But also there's the so-called index effect. So it hasn't been in play the past few months and years, but usually when you get added, then you gain.
Isabel Lee, thank you so much. On DoorDash, as we look at the movers today. But to be clear, DoorDash is in New York City or not?
Yeah, they're everywhere.
They're everywhere.
Yeah.
I've never done
Eats,
DoorDash.
that whole thing, but again, not on my dime. I will not pay for it ever.
I do.
It's out of control.
McDonald's, DoorDash, I get the bill.
But here's the thing. It's the McDonald's is a $12 order. The DoorDash is $10 on top of it.
I know. This
You
is my
cannot-
conversation
But you're
with
so
my
tough on
children all the
everything else,
time.
Lisa. I can't believe you let this slide. You won't let them
It's
eat
a tough one.
soda or anything in the household, but you'll pay for DoorDash.
Okay. For Isabel Lee, we're playing Canadian music today. Because what do? You go back a few. This is before Isabel Lee's times. BTO. Try, let it ride. Well, you've been out running, I've been waiting half the night. Try, let it ride. And would you cry if I told you that I'm lying? And would you say goodbye? Or would you let it ride? And would you cry if I told you that I'm lying? And would you say goodbye? Or would you let it ride?
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
The president wants lower interest rates from Chairman Powell.
You can make the argument that this is a really rich market.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
President Trump signing a wide range of executive orders.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Lisa Mateo, Michael Barr. Markets on the move. We're down 1.3% on the S&P 500, down 76 points, down 450 points right now. The VIX was out three big figures through 26.29. You see it in bonds, higher prices, lower yields, as well the 10-year real yield, 1.91%. Paul, what are we doing? Are we waiting for the White House to wake up and say something? Is that simply is what we're doing?
I think, you talk to all these Bloomberg News reporters on the White House beat. They're basically on social media beat. That's kind of how they do a lot
that's
of the reporting.
brilliantly said.
That's how
we're all
that's how we
slaves
roll.
of social media here as we try to look at policy forward. Thank you to Toronto for reporting today. Thank you to London for reporting today. And of course, a special thank you to Henrietta Treyz, who's really helped out the last number of days. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning. We're brought to you by IBKR. Will the year-over-year change in the U.S. PPI, will it exceed 3% in February this year, February 2025? At IBKR Forecast Trader, the yes was recently at 39%. What's your take? Trade your prediction at ibkr.com/forecast. I haven't even looked, Paul. We got economic data this week, and that PPI is in there on the 13th.
Yep.
CPI on the 12th.
Yep.
We're jolting tomorrow. Mike
We are
McKee says
jolting tomorrow,
jolt is important.
I like jolts. And then we got the UMich on Friday.
Yeah,
that's where a lot of folks are saying if there's a change in kind of how people are feeling about things, that might be one of the first data points you see.
Lindsey Piegza was very good about that. Thank you from Chicago with Stifel this morning. On your commute across the nation, we say good morning. On YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast, growing each and every day some really, really good things. Joe Weisenthal and Tracy Alloway out with an important conversation with one of the foundation members of what we do, Professor Eugene Fama of the Booth School and the University of Chicago. I can't say enough about his contribution to all that we do in investment. From the Interactive Broker Studios, the Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Yeah, and talk about a case of the Mondays. Futures really taking a hit this morning. You have NASDAQ futures down more than 1.5%. Dow futures, S&P futures, both down more than 1%. We go to the two-year yield, 3.95%, down 5 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.25%, and that's down 5 basis points. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little change. We have Tesla and Nvidia leading the losses among the Magnificent Seven stocks. Tesla is down 3%. Its shipments from China falling for 5 months in a row, 49% drop in February compared to last year. Nvidia shares off 2%. Since we mentioned Nvidia, I want to check in with Broadcom because their shares are falling too, down more than 2%, on pace to hand back some of Friday's gains after those strong earnings. TSMC riding the AI wave, but its revenue climbed 39% the first 2 months to 16.8 billion, but its ADRs this morning, they're down about 2%. After the close today, we'll hear from Oracle. Investors going to wait for any AI news from them. We shall see. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciated. One of the things you can do on the Bloomberg, you type in the word Bloomberg, you type in the word total, boom. Up comes the key index that everybody follows. This happens to be the corporate index as well. And you get a chart which shows price up, yield down, or so you hope. And the Bloomberg Total Return Index really having a good stretch here of price up from January. But now what? Aaron Brown joins with PIMCO, portfolio manager in a fixed income. Aaron, just looking off the blended indexes of American fixed income, we've had a heck of a move, price up, yield down. Now what?
So I think for now, the bond market is really grappling with this uncertainty that we're seeing, preside really over the U.S. economy more broadly. And I do think that we're still in this range within the 10-year, certainly for broader fixed income. But I think we are moving in a downward direction with respect to yield levels as the market sort of prices in higher probability of left tail risks emerging. So I think, from here, I would expect to see continued volatility in broader fixed income. But as we move through the rest of this year, and as those tails, particularly the left tails of the U.S. economy, continue to rise, I do think that bonds are resetting into this lower range going forward.
Aaron, are we seeing a rotation out of U.S. Bonds into U.S. fixed income into rest of world?
We certainly saw that last year and sort of in the fourth quarter of last year as sort of this U.S. exceptionalism idea continued to preside. I think as we move into 2025, I think that markets are rethinking a little bit of that move and, seeing that some of the left tails are rising in the U.S. where, perhaps growth is picking up elsewhere outside of the U.S. You've seen that in Europe. You've seen that, in China to some extent as well in the beginning of this year being, better than feared. And, with respect to Europe and the amount of capital potentially that they could be, deploying with respect to fiscal stimulus into the EU Defense Fund, you're also seeing, some green shoots of growth, outside of the U.S. So I do think that this U.S. exceptionalism idea is waning, and that is now causing a little bit of a shift back into U.S. fixed income away from fixed income outside of the U.S., and that's likely to continue. I still think that there's regions outside the U.S. where fixed income looks really attractive, like the UK and like Australia, but broadly speaking, the U.S. looks pretty attractive as well.
Here's a core issue, Aaron, and I look at you've had an incredible year to date in the PIMCO Real Path Blended Income Fund. And the heart of that fund, to me, is gross, in a good way, large diversification. Do you need to be over-diversified now, or does active management within fixed income work?
So firstly, I think in periods of volatility, active always pays, particularly in fixed income. And I think that having a diversified approach and being active, pays double in some respects, because I think you're getting the advantage of, this market, this world is rapidly changing in terms of market expectations, volatility is rising. And in that environment, you kind of don't want to put all your bets, on one market. And so I think diversifying across markets, but also being active and being really nimble to be able to take advantages of dislocations is what's going to pay and how you lead to outperformance.
Aaron, how do you guys think about asset allocation these days? We've got, again, the equity market selling off pretty solidly here. We got a VIX up again another 3 points today to 26 and change here. How do you think about asset allocation here?
So I think number one, always, but particularly in times of heightened volatility, is appropriate portfolio construction. Understanding the correlations between the different positions in your portfolio, stress testing every single day your portfolio against different adverse scenarios, and then being appropriately diversified and appropriately liquid to be able to take advantages of dislocations, which are emerging, I think is what really is going to lead to appropriate asset allocation, but also outperformance. We've been really focusing on some of the systematic strategies that have worked really well this year, but also focused on being dynamic and not staying, too long in stale positions, but being nimble and trading around as we, break to new ranges and we see the markets mispricing what the risks are.
So to take the feature item, Germany trades massive price down, yield up. It's a reset, if you will. What do you do after that, whether you captured that move or not? How do you reset in something like Germany after a ginormous move?
Yeah, so we had been long Germany at the end of last year and long, broader European fixed income. We lightened our position and are fairly neutral European fixed income right now on the back of some of the, announcements that have been made and potential commitments that have been made with respect to increasing the European Defense Fund. That does potentially change the trajectory of Europe, at least for the second half of this year and next year, if it actually passes and they do commit, to increase defense spending. So that would be an environment where you don't want to be long European fixed income anymore. You want to rotate to other markets like the UK or like Australia or even the US, where you think that, the potential fiscal stimulus isn't going to be as large. So being really nimble and rotating out of Europe, I think makes sense right now in terms of fixed income.
Aaron, PIMCO, obviously a huge global investment player. What is your call on artificial intelligence, AI? It's been a key theme for the last couple of years in this market.
So we're using it internally at PIMCO every single day with respect to how we're thinking about taking risk, how we're analyzing our portfolio, and how we're sourcing new ideas. We're also using it, more broadly across the company as well. But within our portfolio, we see this as a structural theme. I do think, though, there's going to be a transition away from some of the early winners in AI, which we've already seen, into some more of the more specialty chips and into some of more of the adopters and hyperscalers. So we're really investing in the next stage of the AI build out, the power AI names, some of the infrastructure providers to AI, as opposed to the sort of chips, which were the first stage of the AI wave.
Aaron Brown, thank you so much. With PIMCO, from bonds we move to equities here with futures negative 77 and the VIX out 3 big figures. Perfect guy on a perfect Monday. Joseph Mazzola joins us, head of trading and derivatives strategy at Charles Schwab. Joe, what does a 26 VIX mean and the way we're getting to 26? What does that signal to you with a few years of experience?
It signals that you should expect at least a 1.5% move in the S&P 500 every day. I mean, that's kind of what we're seeing, guys, and it's priced in. It's priced into kind of the expectations in the options market, and it's priced into, I think, some of the sentiment that we're seeing specifically from our trader sentiment survey. It's been a while since we've heard our traders say, over 25-30% of them are starting to adopt options as hedging strategies kind of heading into the next couple months. So it's something that's at the top of their minds, and they're already starting to employ those strategies.
Is there a short bet on the street?
A short volatility bet or
short bet?
Market
Excuse
bet?
me, price bet. See, he's talking fancy derivative stuff. Exactly. I'm like Lizzie and Saunders. Stock up, stock down. Is there a short price bet, Joe Mazzola, on the street?
I would say right now that from what we're kind of seeing from clients, they've rolled out of some of the bullishness. We're definitely seeing more bearishness. But whether it's short, I'm not seeing that in terms of some of the margin positionings. But what we are seeing is that on the dips, we're just not seeing them step into the same extent that maybe we saw at the end of January. I think a lot more caution here as more and more of our clients are really starting to digest some of the political instability that we're seeing.
NASDAQ has been leading this market down, Joe, and that's not a good sign because we've had tech leading this market for, well more than a decade here. What's the view of maybe the Mag 7, the tech leadership that so many investors have been accustomed to?
So, Paul, that's really interesting because, as I talked about with the dip buying, that was something that was really prevalent in the last couple of years. But now we're hearing that from our clients that they still think tech's overvalued. Even coming into February, that was something that they were looking at in terms of just the valuations. The other thing I think is important is when you look at expectations for earnings for Mag 7 over the rest of the year, 25, even into 26, those earnings expectations are coming down. So the other 493, to a certain extent, they're coming up, but slower than the expectations. I think it was about 35% in 2024, expectations for about 15% growth in 2025. That's a big drop.
Joe, inside baseball, people talk about the last hour of trading. When does the last hour of trading really begin? 3:00, or is it like 3:32, or is it like 3:52 with 8 minutes to go?
Well, Tom, I think it depends on volatility. I mean, if you are in a low vol session, right, where we just been kind of putzing along for 2 years and a 45-degree angle to the right side, right, going up 24% a year. Then you don't have a lot of volatility and people really aren't engaged and outside of maybe the beginning and the end of the day. But when you have volatility like this and you're seeing over 70 million option contracts trading on a daily basis, I think you extend that last hour to really include that last hour. And it's not just the 10 or 15 minutes that we always kind of talked about the closing rotations in the past.
Very good. Thank you so much. Joe Mazzola, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it this morning. Let's get him back on. Does anyone awake in the control room?
Well, it's a Monday.
It's a Monday, 50. Let's get Joe Mazzola on again here as we tear it up with a VIX on 3 points. S&P negative 76, as Paul said, 1.3%. Dow negative 450. I'm not out to negative 500 yet on the Dow. The Sweeney yield 3.95% on the 2-year yield. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Canada's next prime minister has helped run 2 G7 economies in crisis and will now try to steer Canada through a looming trade war brought by President Donald Trump. Former central banker Mark Carney will become prime minister after the governing Liberal Party elected him its leader Sunday in a landslide vote with 85.9% support.
The Canadian government has rightly retaliated and is rightly retaliating with our own tariffs that will have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impact here in Canada.
Carney replaces Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who announced his resignation in January, but remains Prime Minister until his successor is sworn in the coming days. President Trump said the U.S. economy faces a period of transition, deflecting concerns about the risks of a slowdown. The president was asked about the possibility of a recession on Fox News.
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition because what we're doing is very big. We're bringing wealth back to America. That's a big thing. And there are always periods of, it takes a little time. It takes a little time.
Trump's administration argues that tax cuts and tariff revenue will spur the economy despite market turmoil caused by his tariff policies. Israel stepping up the pressure on Hamas to extend the first phase of the ceasefire deal in Gaza. Israel cut off power to the lone facility in Gaza that was still receiving electricity from Israel. It was a desalination plant that provided drinking water to hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in central Gaza. This comes a week after Israel cut off the flow of aid and goods into Gaza in order to try to pressure Hamas to continue that first phase of the ceasefire. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Thanks, Michael Barr. Paul, I'm looking at the Standard & Poor's 500. Where are we now? We're down 77 points. And basically, we're back to September, late September of last year. We forgot how far we've come. The 12-month track record there's up 13% with dividends reinvested.
You sure? Yeah, so it's okay.
We've pulled back, but we forget the addiction. Was it 2 years back to back up 20%?
20+%. You're right. Yeah. We had a rough 2022, as we all remember. Stocks, bonds, commodities, everything was brutal in 23 and 22, but 23 and 24 we came back very strongly. A lot of investors, Tom, a lot of strategists, portfolio managers will come in here and say, a 10%, a 12%, a 15% pullback is generally can be considered healthy in an otherwise longer-term bull market if that's where you think we are. So that's kind of the question a lot of folks are asking here. Is this a temporary pullback, maybe buy the dip on a little bit here and there, or is it something more fundamental? Yeah, I don't see it on tape. No, we're not there yet.
Within the complete originality of where we are, folks, we have a great team collating all the headlines that come into us because we can't. Lisa fails every morning, so we have people that help out bringing in the headlines. And we had the Kevin Hassett headlines.
Yep.
But that's about it today.
Yeah.
I just haven't had. Maybe you'll see it at 10 o'clock with Alex Steele.
Yeah, we'll see some more economic data coming out this week. It's a busy week for inflation data, CPI coming out, and we've also got PPI.
Do we have retail sales this week?
Yes, we have next Monday on St. Patrick's Day. There you go.
National holiday.
There you go for us Irish Americans.
We'll have to see. I just, folks, we're going to do the best we can, but the answer is, I think we're all waiting for, I was mentioning, nobody at the dining room table this weekend knew who Gilda Radner was.
Oh.
Which was painful.
That's sad, yep.
And, I'm like, never mind, we did a tariff.
Right.
And then never mind.
Yep.
And I guess that's where we are. Again, folks, seriously, a dearth of headlines this morning coming out of the White House. I think that's what all of you internationally want to know. On the data front, we'll do more through the day on Bloomberg Radio. Futures at -80, out three big figures, 26.38 on the VIX. Thank you, Joe Mazzola, for perspective there. Lisa mentions that Bitcoin not participating. You think 79,000 Bitcoin? No. Bitcoin 83,000 right now. The 10-year yield in a solid 6 basis points. Price up, yield down 4.24%. Oil $67 a barrel. From New York City, nationwide, Bloomberg surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Futures Report sponsored by Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer focuses the power of their thinking on you, creating customized plans to help achieve your goals. Put the power of Oppenheimer thinking into your investing, wealth management, capital markets, investment banking. All right, we've got a mix of tariffs, higher unemployment rate, federal job cuts. They're all sparking worries of an economic slowdown. That has futures really under pressure this morning. NASDAQ futures down more than 1.5%. Dow futures down more than 1%. Same for S&P futures. The two-year yield, 3.93%. 2%, down 6 basis points. And the yield on the 10-year, 4.24%, down 6 basis points. Spot gold, $2,903 an ounce. We have Brent crude, $70 a barrel. WTI crude, $67 a barrel. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little change. More earnings this week after the close today. Oracle. This week, we'll also hear from Adobe, as well as a retail sector like Dollar General, Williams-Sonoma, and Dick's Sporting Goods. Companies making news, Robinhood Financial, Robinhood Securities fined $26 million by FINRA. That's for violating the regulator's rules. And DoorDash joining the S&P 500 March 24th. It shares up 3%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Thanks to Isabel Lee for some perspective on DoorDash there about 20 minutes ago. Right now, and we're going to get the markets open here in a bit, Kristen Bitterly with us with Citigroup out of Notre Dame, just exquisite academics out of Notre Dame, and we're thrilled she could join us this morning. We have a tax-aware investment up 20% 2 years in a row. Now we have all this emotion as well. Are you taking profits? I mean, that's in the old days what we used to do. Now we have wealth management. What are you doing about the tax situation if everybody's got ginormous gains on their portfolio?
Well, I think the really interesting thing for U.S. investors is that there's plenty of strategies that are tax aware where you can actually do that rebalancing without necessarily having to take the gain.
How do you do that?
So basically what you can do is generate passive losses within portfolios such that if you want to rebalance, you're not actually penalized for rebalancing and then following the benchmark index. And there's even more innovative strategies because in a bull market, it's going to be difficult to actually continue to generate those losses unless you're adding capital every single month. And so what some of the more innovative strategies are doing are using futures and options to be able to do that as well. But that being said, Tom, I think your question is more around looking at the market that we're in and actually saying, where should you have exposure? And that is something we did some substantial rebalancing in Q4 of last year when we were just looking at, we couldn't have predicted DeepSeek or anything like that, but we were just looking at the outsized representation of the Mag 7 and saying we see earnings broadening out this year. So let's be a little bit more balanced in terms of our equity exposure. And we also diversified internationally. So if you are someone who came into this year where you have fixed income exposure, you have international exposure, you weren't overly exposed to those mega cap names, well, you're not happy right now seeing some of the uncertainty and volatility, you're pretty well positioned in terms of being able to weather this storm.
What are you hearing from your clients just in the last several weeks with this sell-off in the markets? We're off in the S&P 500, 7-8% from the recent highs. What are you hearing from your clients? Is there a level of concern, panic? What are you hearing?
Well, when you look at how the market is reacting, I think very simply, it's been a pretty orderly sell-off. You can even see that in levels of the VIX. I think our investors in wealth management, we are lucky because they're long-term capital. And so they're really playing the long game here. But I think the big question on the table right now is we started this year from a position of strength. You could talk about the broadening out story in U.S. equity earnings. You could talk about the $6.5 trillion in cash on the sidelines, inflation coming down, even the fact that Fed funds have peaked. And now the question is looking at this economic data that's coming in, particularly when it comes to sentiment, consumer confidence, as well as the employment backdrop. People are wondering, all of these details, are they telling us a different economic story?
48 seconds before we go to the market opening. What does buy the dip mean to Kristen Bitterly?
I think buy the dip means we have not yet capitulated. However, there are opportunities, especially right now, large cap, quality, free cash flow generating names. If I'm buying the dip and actually not just picking a moment from market timing, but going on the way down, I would lean into quality, free cash flow.
So there you go, quality, free cash flow. I mean,
are you allowed to give us a name, or do you go in the timeout chair if you do that?
Well, I mean, single stocks, unfortunately, I would go into the timeout chair, Tom. But what I will say from a sector perspective is you can look at some of just go from a size perspective, large cap, profitable, free cash flow. Even some of the dividend grower type names would be beneficial as well.
We're going to come back. Kristen Bitterly with us. A good day to be with her in Citigroup. And, just the basic idea, folks, about how do you manage the emotion. I mean, if you look at an inflammatory hour, like the Sweeney Steel Hour. You can barely contain your emotions at 10 o'clock.
Well, we sent, where Alex is? She's down in Houston today.
She's in Houston
and tomorrow
today.
for a big
With
energy
you?
conference. No, I'm stuck here. But she's the energy czar here at Bloomberg News, and so she's down in Houston with all the energy
doing like
bigwigs.
in the bars there in Houston. She's
Yes.
doing the bull and the rodeo thing.
Probably.
You know, you don't have to. Oh, you think that's funny, Lisa?
Because I've done it before.
And followed up. Yeah, I got on once, and they said never again with the market opening. Lisa Mateo.
Oh, let's see if this market volatility will extend into another week. Let's start with the S&P 500. Not looking so good. Down about 1.5%. 81 points, 5,686. We go to the Dow, down more than 1%. 516 points, 42,295. And finally, the NASDAQ coming in down nearly now it is 2% at 363 points, 17,838. We go to the 2-year yield, 3.93%, down 7 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.24%, down 6 basis points. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little change. We have Bitcoin down 0.5% at just over 82,000. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Real stasis there, except the equity market. Certainly, first printing here into the first minutes of trading is worser, as they say, than futures. Down negative 411 right now. SPX down 1.4%. Kristen Bitterly with us here on managing emotions. Is cash a constructive holding right now?
I think it's part of a portfolio in terms of maintaining liquidity and being able to buy into some of these opportunities. I think the thing that you always run into, going back to this concept of market timing, is for investors who believe they're either all in or all out. That is not productive.
Come on, she's killing me. You're at Notre Dame. You're killing it. Show me 1 minute in economics at Notre Dame where, quote, market timing, unquote, worked.
It never worked, market timing. That's the thing, is if the stats are actually on average, if you miss the 2 best days in a given calendar year, you erode your per annum gains by nearly 80%. And so the reason for that is you tend to have clustered volatility in the market, where essentially the sell-offs are followed by some of the best days. And so what we tend to see is, if in this type of environment, if you're very nervous, if you go all out and you're in cash, yes, there's some attractive yields there, but those are temporary. Your long-term earnings are certainly going to suffer.
Shout out, Ryan Detrick today out on Twitter had a great tweet on this, Paul Sweeney, about the X number of days.
Yeah, boy.
Single days, like the days Duke loses in basketball.
Rare.
The single days, if you're not in the market when it moves, Ms. Bitterly's number is 80% of your gain evaporates.
Absolutely. We've heard that before. So we've seen a lot of policy-driven uncertainty in the marketplace over the last couple of months. Are you suggesting to your clients look past that and focus on the long term? Because, boy, you can make short-term recession calls, you can make inflation calls, stagflation. There's a lot of concern short-term, but do you make the call to look past it?
So what I would say is the number one concern that our investors, and the number one question that they really have, is I think coming into this year, there was comfort in terms of when President Trump won the election, there was this overarching concept of pro-market.
Yep,
the S&P 500 is a barometer for success, and the 10-year below 5%. I think some of the most recent commentary, where taking a victory lap because yields have come down and what that means for mortgages and other parts of the market, are causing people to question a little bit. But going back to what I said earlier, asset allocation has worked in these markets. That actually is something healthy, and it's something that we haven't really seen over the past couple of years. So correlation, fixed income equity, the lack of correlation there is actually working in your favor. So diversification, asset allocation are where to be.
Do you own a Tesla, like a car?
Do I actually own a Tesla myself? No, I do not.
Thank God.
I do not.
It's painful. Mrs. Keene was on the phone with somebody that owns a Tesla. Wow.
Yeah.
It's like depreciation city. Tesla down 14. It was like a 253 indication. I didn't even mention it. 248 on Tesla.
5.5%. Yep.
Right now.
Yep.
Is it 5.5%
today? Yeah, 5.5% today.
I still don't know how to do that.
Today. BQ, baby. BQ function. Bloomberg quote.
50%.
Yeah.
It's working out.
But even if you look at that, the rally post the election was so extreme, so that volatility to the upside, you're going to have some of it to the downside as well.
We're back to September.
Exactly.
That's how I look. We're back to September 2023. 24. Notre Dame March Madness. Come on.
No.
Please. Oh, I know. I was just at Notre Dame last week. I was. Our women are faring better than our men.
There we go.
Yes.
And there's always football season.
Kristen, there is, and they're better than good. Kristen Bitterly, thank you so much. She is with Citigroup. The Dow, negative 477 points. The VIX, 26.69. Stay with us. More data checks this morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, 3-week stretch of volatility, it's been extended. Stocks taking a hit to start the new trading week. The Nasdaq down more than 2%. The S&P 500 down more than 1%. The Dow down about 0.8%. We have the 2-year yield 3.94%, down 6 basis points, and the yield on the 10-year 4.24%, down 6 basis points. With the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little change, leading the losses for the Mag 7. Let's check in right now. Tesla down 6%. Right behind that, that would be Alphabet's Google, down more than 3.5%. Want to take a quick check of chip stocks. We have NVIDIA shares. They're down about 2%, and Broadcom down about 2.5%. We've been talking a lot about tariffs. Celebrity-backed tequila actually bracing for the burn. Bloomberg's Business Week saying Kendall Jenner's tequila business has built up half a year's worth of inventory to prepare for this. Really? So, yeah, experts are saying the problem is that tequila made exclusively in Mexico, and there's too many celebrity brands, right? Even Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has his own brand of tequila. So, yes, it's oversaturated.
Oh, did you want to get that in there? Can you make it clear?
That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Do they have Dwayne "The Rock" what's it called?
Terramana.
Terramana tequila. Do they
Yes,
have that
it's
at Costco?
delicious.
No, of course it is. Of course
Is there such a is there a Kirkland tequila?
There's Kirkland vodka that we do.
So you understand where this comes from, folks. Before all this idiocy. Good morning, Mr. Clooney. Thank you for listening every day.
Clooney too.
The sophisticates knew that there were 3 kinds of salsa tequila, and if you were broke, I think you had the green label. And if you wanted to impress the girl, you had the white label, and only the trust fund kids could afford the gold label. I kid you not, that was branding. That was the entire tequila landscape in Boulder, Colorado a few years ago. Market list finally, Belchunas makes an appearance. Eric, we could literally have a 4-hour discussion which directly affects our listeners' portfolios with the dominance of ETFs. Eric Belchunas, the BitDog portfolio, I'm picking IBIT because I can spell it, is down 22%. Is it a bear market for Bitcoin ETFs?
A little one. Yeah, absolutely. There was another 20% downturn.
It's right on support on mine, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at the flows, there are outflows, and they're pretty steady. That said, you're looking at about $4 billion of outflows. $4 billion represents about 3 or 4% of the assets. So on the flip side, you could say about 95% of the assets in there are stuck or are sticky. We'll see how much that can hold up. To me, if you can keep it under 10%, that's a good sign. Typically, ETF investors are pretty good at not selling. I just think at this point, 20, if it turns into 40, we'll see what happens. But these ETFs aren't going anywhere. I mean, they're going to be there for the next rally. It's just something you see. I always tell people, there's a lot of trading around these ETFs, a lot of arbitrage. So if you see 4 or 5 billion flows in any category, it could just be the traders doing something. until you see, 20, 30 billion leave, I wouldn't really think too much of it.
So what do you typically see from ETF investors in times of volatility, Eric? We've had, again, the S&P 500 pulling back, 7.5% here. Did they sell? Did they buy? Did they just sit on their hands? And what do they do?
Yeah, so ETF investors are very disciplined.
Really?
Yeah, I'll tell you,
Cool.
especially for the Vanguard, like VU and IVV and VTI, these sort of plain vanilla low-cost index fund ETFs, they always see inflows. So this year, VU has seen 31 billion of inflows. That's ridiculous.
What is VU? How do you spell that?
VOO. It's the Vanguard S&P 500. Oh, way to remember that is the V is a Roman numeral 5, and then the 00. It's the only clever ticker Vanguard ever did. No, Vanguard did. I'm just saying.
Emily Graffeo probably came up with that.
Yeah. But
continue.
So if we looked at the flows this year, and I wrote a note saying that it's going to take a lot more than this to scare U.S. ETF investors. They're just piling in money, and they still pile into the U.S. Europe and international's doing better, but nobody cares here so far. Yeah. Here's my thesis. I think when you buy a low-cost ETF or index fund, you get married. You are done flirting. You're done dating. You're done looking for this or that. You're
Is
like
there something you want to tell us about the weekend?
You're like, look, I got a 3 basis point S&P 500 situation.
Yep.
I don't care what the market does. I'm buying it until I need to retire. So I just think there's a level of sort of like resignation with some of these investors.
Until the COVID down 33% on the V Roman numeral 00. In 2022, the correction down, I think my eyes are failing me, down 24%. If you go beyond a bear market of negative 18%, emotion clicks in. Are you telling me the emotion on ETFs is different than the emotion on Tesla?
Yeah, absolutely. Tesla is used by active managers. There's a lot of sentiment. You don't want to hold. There's like a behavioral reasons to trade it. Again, think about your own portfolio. You probably have a cheap beta fund in the middle somewhere, your 401k. Is this making you sell anything? Most people would say no. Now, back in the day, if you had an active manager that was underperforming, you're like, oh my God, I'm not doing that well, so you'd switch. But again, this sort of Vanguard bid is so sticky because people are convinced it's the best deal in town. And this is why in my Bogle book, I wrote that he had accidentally had a huge positive impact on behavior. Just by creating a product you could marry, he really stopped people from selling at the bad time. So I think you would have to see a worse market than this. In the COVID, VU took in about 12 billion in the March, but it did see 2 billion in April. So net COVID, it still took in money.
Wow.
Really, during COVID,
yeah,
a core index took in
let me blow your mind even more. Vanguard took in money every month in 2008.
Really?
Even October.
So this is, I mean, nobody cares what Eric Balchunas says. It's just, this is a rising tide like we've never seen.
Well, the traders will come and go. That's sort of like the outer layer. But this Vanguard bid is rock solid. I've yet to see it.
It's rock. This is really important, folks.
Yeah.
We're making jokes about it, but this is like 110% of our audience. That's 42 people. This is like serious stuff.
Sounds like my book
Eric,
audience.
What's the name of the book again? The Bogle Effect?
The Bogle Effect.
And the movie, it's emotional. Sure. It's like the one that won the Academy Award. This is going to be a low budget, independent
but it's
movie.
high quality. Right?
You know, they made a movie about GameStop, and yet they won't make a movie about Bogle. It makes no sense to me. Because, it wasn't dramatic.
Okay, what do the leverage funds do? Sweeney doesn't own the leverage funds. I mean, forget about triple leveraged on cash. Triple leveraged NVIDIA, do funds flow out of those, or are they rock solid too?
So right now, like these positive leveraged, they're seeing inflows. Because until it gets real bad, these leverage people like to play. Yeah, it's a mean reversion day to day. So TQQQ, which is the biggest one in the world, has seen almost flows really every day for the past 7 days. People are almost trying to will a rebound.
I got 1 minute left here. Philadelphia Phillies this season. How's spring training going? I mean, they're all like 82 years old. Is there anybody on the team under 35?
No, after last year, I'm a little, I expect nothing.
I just I'm trying to get away from the Eagles.
Yeah.
20 million for Barkley?
Worth every penny.
Worth every penny. Listen, when you win, you got to pay the people. And Barkley is special. You know, he
See?
turns like a
voice
1 yard
changes.
run into a 3 yard run, and then he goes big once a game.
Yep, that's it.
You got to pay those guys.
Okay. We have the news here. It's truncated because we were not talking about the Detroit Lions with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Mark Carney won the race to become Canada's next prime minister, putting the former central banker in charge of the country just as President Donald Trump's administration threatens its economic future. The ex-Bank of Canada and Bank of England governor won the contest to lead the Liberal Party of Canada with nearly 86% of the vote. In his acceptance speech, Carney said he would protect the country's economy and sovereignty.
The Canadian government has rightly retaliated and is rightly retaliating with our own tariffs that will have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impact here in Canada. And my government will keep our tariffs on until the Americans show us respect.
The transfer of power from Justin Trudeau to Carney is expected to take place within days. Saudi Arabia is set to host talks tomorrow between the U.S. and Ukraine following last month's row during President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to the White House. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. That was really valuable with Eric. I had no idea the persistency of core investment.
It's just one of the, Tom, we've been in this business a long time. It's just one of the great sea changes that I've seen in the business.
Yeah.
The growth of this ETF business has just been extraordinary. It's upended institutional investing.
John Bogle gets the headlines. What a joy to, one of my great moments with him and Cliff Assis. Can we mention Arthur Levitt too?
Sure.
Who just said fees are too high.
Yep.
That's all there is to it. From New York City, stay with us. More data checks. Good morning.
You're listening to Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney here. Tape a little bit better, negative 400 on negative 363 on the Dow. Of course, the number one thing for me, I mean, I look at, forget about John Williams and his interview with Michael McKee. I noticed a lunch keynote at the panel I did not go to on Friday from Jerome Powell. I noticed Seth Carpenter speaking at the panel also that I did not go to. Joining us now, someone who went to the panel.
Did go to.
Michael McKee. What was the backstory at the Booth School panel? Forget about what they said on the mic. What was the tone of the cacophony we're living right now?
I suppose it was the cacophony, a lot of uncertainty about what's going on and what's going to happen going forward, which leaves people without a good path to make a decision. If you're in business or if you're at the Fed, you're not exactly sure what's going to work or what's going to happen. So you hold back. And that is where the economy is at the moment, sort of in this suspended animation.
I was reading some comments from Anna Wong, Bloomberg Economics. She was saying, basically, I'm summing it up here, we're going to see some of this uncertainty manifest itself in GDP numbers first, maybe even in the second quarter, and then maybe inflation data in the second half of the year. Does that kind of make some sense here?
It does. We may see an impact in first quarter GDP because of the rush to bring stuff into the country to get ahead.
I see. Okay.
To get ahead of tariffs. The interesting thing, though, is the Atlanta Fed put out an update to their GDP now over the weekend, noting that $32 billion of the trade deficit was because people were bringing gold bars into the country. And so they have a separate math on the GDP now that shows if you take that out, GDP is not negative, but it's at 0.4%, 0.4. So it's essentially flat. And you have to take it out when it comes to GDP because the government does not count gold bars in GDP, imports of gold bars.
If Fed presidents and governors were there, the one voice I would lean forward on, he's 82 years old, which I can't believe he'll forever be 59, Donald Cohn at the Booth School. What did the former vice chairman, what did Donald Cohn say about this moment we're living?
Did not talk to him about that. He was on a panel talking about the impact of monetary policy and how it, the first paper was on how monetary policy gets transmitted into the economy.
It's Powell's press conference, right?
It's partly that and partly anticipation by people in the markets and partly the data that comes in.
CPI tomorrow. I mean,
Wednesday,
excuse me, CPI Wednesday. Well, wait a minute. You yelled at me once, but he had a tantrum, full-scale tantrum. Tom, JOLTS matters. JOLTS tomorrow, does it matter?
JOLTS doesn't matter for a couple of reasons. One, the information contained isn't as useful when you have fewer jobs available. When we had so many available, it was obviously telling us the labor market was pretty tight. But it also is January data. And now everything that's happening, all the people who are getting laid off in the federal government, et cetera, that's happening from mid-February on. So January data isn't going to tell us anything about that.
CPI?
CPI matters to the Fed and to the general public and its estimation of what's going to happen, the so-called inflation expectations, but we're still a long way from the next meeting, so this isn't going to be a determinative CPI.
I don't care. All I want to know, I got 20 seconds here. Brad Martian, what did the Bruins get for unloading Brad Martian to the Florida Panthers?
A couple of younger, maybe not quite as talented, but still good players and draft choice, but they lost a lot of fans. I mean, that was you just can't believe that the rat is no longer there.
And he's so damn, I'm not even a Bruins fan. He's so good. We're playing Canadian music today for their election coming up, Stills and Young.
There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody's wrong. Young people speaking their minds are getting so much resistance from behind. I think it's time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.